We will now bring up House Bill 118 for its third hearing. And our first witness today is James Raffeld, Executive Director, Utility Scale Solar Energy Coalition. For opponent, I'm sorry, Jason. What did I say? I just wanted to see if they were awake yet. Okay, Jason. Welcome, Jason.
I knew what you meant, Chairman. It's okay. Ooh, I take my mask off and I feel like I'm cheating.
Nope, go ahead.
Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, members of the House Public Utilities Committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Jason Rayfeld, and I'm a lifelong resident of Ohio. I'm the Executive Director of the Utility Scale Solar Energy Coalition, or USIC. With me, I have Jared Wren. Jared, you want to put your hand up? Jared's a developer with Hecate Energy. And Jared will speak to you today about the thoroughness of the Ohio Power Siting Board process and the importance of community engagement. I'm also joined by Mike Volpe over here. Mike's the Vice President of Open Road Renewables and an all-around great guy. Mike is going to address some of the misinformation heard recently before this committee. Both are developers doing great work right here in Ohio. Before I get started on my testimony, I would like to share with you a very brief video that explains some of the things we're going to talk to you about. I think it's maybe 3 minutes, maybe just a touch longer than that.
Growing up on a farm, I mean, when you're 9, 10 years old, you get your first 4-H project. So I had beef, cattle, steers that we showed at the fair. Of course, my dad had me on a tractor when I was probably 8 or 9, and by 11 and 12, I was driving the tractors by myself.
As a family, we worked together. I remember going up and down the rows of soybeans with a hoe, cutting out thistles and all of those things, and picking the apples for the applesauce. So that was all a family thing, and all of the people around here, all the farmers, did the same thing.
We now have about 1,400 acres here in Champaign County, mostly corn and soybeans, but also some specialty crops. We have one of the largest raspberry farms here in Ohio, and also grow about 5 acres of peaches.
My children and my niece and nephews would like to keep it, but there's a practicality side of that. Obviously, we go up and down. We have price fluctuations. Last year was one of the lowest income years we had in 2020. So in order to stabilize that, producing electricity as a crop rather than corn and soybeans, it's going to produce more income. So that allows the next generation to justify owning land. And I just like to see that continue as long as possible.
The reason we even looked at solar was I knew that I had a 5th generation coming along that I hoped would become part of the farm. Things are changing rapidly, but we've been looking for a number of years at what we can do to improve the profits on the farm.
The solar program provides, on a part of our farm operation, a relatively stable, increasing income over a long period of time that provides stability to the farm operation. No matter the weather, no matter the markets, we can count on that income each year, and preserving, of course, also that land. That land, as the solar field is out there, is in grassland, and actually is building organic matter and tilth in the soil. So it preserves not only our farm operation, but the farmland also. And in 30 years, that land will be more productive than it is going into the solar program.
Most of the people in this community are for it, they're in favor of it as they start to learn what it's going to do for the school districts and the local government, general funds. You know, it's not bringing outside development of anything else to this area. It's not changing the way the neighbor's farm's going to look, or you know, it's not going to bring a shopping center or a subdivision next door or anything like that.
You know, people tend to look at the pilot payments and the revenue generated to governmental agencies, our schools, our 911, our libraries, all those are benefactors of pilot payments. But the flip side of that is there's a whole lot of money going into the private sector, and the private sector is very good about spending that and investing that back into our community. Well, we feel we're in a better position today than we could have ever hoped for 5 years ago. The potential to maintain and improve our schools not only makes families want to stay, it makes families willing to move back. And once you have a vibrant community in one sector, it sort of flows out to the other businesses also that support those things. So it's been a huge win for our community.
Thank you for watching that short video. I'm here today on behalf of the Utility Scale Solar Energy Coalition, or USEC. USEC is a member-based trade organization representing utility-scale solar developers, manufacturers, and industry leaders throughout our state. Despite being competitors, this group joined together to ensure the viability of this new industry by focusing on education and engagement within local communities. Currently, we have 19 members. You can see they're up here on the screen. I'm also here for a personal reason. Once upon a time, I was commissioned as a United States Naval officer at Naval Air Station Pensacola. The unit for which I was selected had very rigorous physical requirements and required a thorough physical examination, which was completed at the beginning of officer candidate training. This physical took an entire day, and at the conclusion of a battery of tests and needles and pokes and lots of questions, you sat down with the medical team and reviewed your results. All of mine were excellent. However, the physician team pointed out one item of concern. The doctors put an x-ray of my lungs taken earlier in the day in front of a light board on the wall opposite us. They proceeded to point out a couple of slightly darker patches in my lungs. While they assured me this was not anything that would disqualify me from my program, and it didn't, they said it was something they commonly saw in Navy members from Ohio and the Midwest. It was, they said, a result of pollution in the air caused largely from the burning of fossil fuels. They continued they did not see this darkening of the lungs in service members from other parts of the country. This was back in 1999. So when I go home tonight and I look at my two 5-year-old girls, I'm hopeful that they can grow up in Ohio with cleaner air and without dark spots in their lungs. Utility-scale solar will help accomplish that for the state of Ohio. So when I say I'm here for personal reasons, I really am. So aside from the health benefits of cleaner air, utility-scale power is poised to bring billions of dollars to Ohio's schools, local communities, farmers, and more. Solar energy can meet the growing demands from businesses to supply increasing amounts of their power from clean sources. So why now? In a word, it's demand. We know that in Ohio, data centers like Amazon, Facebook, and Google are buying solar energy to meet their sustainability goals. GM and LG are partnering on a battery factory, in part because of the utility-scale solar construction. Utilities are switching to clean power, and businesses around Ohio and our country continue to demand more. This is part of a global trend. Recently, New York-based BlackRock CEO Larry Fink sent a letter to CEOs which stated, quote, from January through November 2020, investors in mutual funds and exchange-traded funds invested $288 billion globally in sustainable assets. That represents a 96% increase over the whole of 2019. Additionally, in 2020, BlackRock commissioned a global sustainability investing survey called Sustainability Goes Mainstream. The study encompassed 425 investors made up of pension plans, sovereign wealth funds, insurers, asset managers, endowments, foundations, and global wealth managers from 27 different countries, representing an estimated $25 trillion in investment. Respondents from this study indicated that they are planning to double their sustainable assets under management in the next 5 years. This is nothing short of a remarkable shift in investing that's going to have a massive impact on clean energy around the globe and right here in Ohio. All of this investment, from the data centers and Fortune 500s to the global investors, means the opportunity for billions of dollars of new investment in local economies across Ohio for the first time in a generation. Solar is popular. More than 75% of Ohioans favor allowing solar development in their community. A recent poll which surveyed Ohioans between December 24, 2020 and January 1, 2021 found 84% of Ohioans believe property owners have the right to do what they want with their land, even if it means moving away from traditional uses of farmland. 67% believe it is important to bring new sources of clean energy to our state. And 64% believe that elected officials should do more to protect individual property rights. Our high-voltage transmission system offers opportunity. Increased capacity in our well-developed transmission system has opened up recently as the low price of natural gas has caused numerous Ohio coal plants to close. This has helped create the opportunity for utility-scale solar to connect to our transmission network. Without this access and capacity on Ohio's transmission network, building solar here would be far too expensive. And as in real estate, it's location, location, location. Eastern states are implementing aggressive goals in clean energy procurement, but they often lack the in-state resources to meet their goals. Transmission congestion, population density, and unfavorable land conditions are some of their challenges. Thus, part of the renewable energy goals can be served by Ohio Solar. Unlike states east of us, Ohio has abundant, open, flat, and dry land that is ideal for solar farms. Farmland is plentiful in Ohio, and farmers benefit financially from solar leases, which often enable them to keep farmland in their family due to the high revenues received. All of this means that after years of reduced exports, Ohio now has a new export opportunity that will allow us to invest in our local communities, schools, infrastructure, and jobs with revenue from other states. Utility-scale solar is now cost competitive with all other fuels. According to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the cost of silicone solar cells has fallen from $76 per watt in 1977, I think only NASA could afford it then, to 20 cents per watt in 2020. In addition, the investment firm Lazard recently completed their annual levelized cost of energy analysis. Lazard determined that the cost of utility-scale solar had fallen 90% from 2009 to 2020. This is a dramatic decrease due to improvements in manufacturing, efficiency, and the pricing of components. As a result of these price decreases, utility-scale solar is now cost competitive with any fuel source. Ohio's sun is there when we need it. Ohio has the solar irradiance levels to support large-scale solar. May through September are all months with more than ample light and heat from our sun. These months balance out the gray, cloudy days of late winter that we're all too familiar with here in Ohio. Photovoltaic solar efficiency has advanced, so even on these gray days, the panels are still producing electrons. This balance ensures utility-scale solar will thrive in Ohio. Importantly, Ohio's peak demand happens in July and August. This coincides with the highest level of production from solar panels. Simply put, Ohio Solar produces the most electrons at the time when our grid needs them the most. This helps our grid meet demand spikes when air conditioners are working their hardest. There's rigorous scrutiny of a limited number of buildable sites. Utility-scale solar can only go some places. Too far from transmission lines or too bumpy, for example, and the project likely won't work. As a result, there are a limited number of sites in Ohio that can support this solar. Ohio also has one of the most extensive processes for licensing utility-scale solar facilities in the country. We're fortunate to have a well-developed regulatory framework requiring detailed applications for proposed projects, a thorough review by professional staff, extensive opportunities for public input, and a rigorous hearing process. I will let Jared speak more about the Ohio Siting Board process, but Ohio does have one of the most vigorous processes in our country. We provide revenue for local communities, schools, and farms. As mentioned earlier, utility-scale solar power will give Ohio and its local communities a multi-billion-dollar infusion at a time when it is critically needed. An economic analysis done by the Ohio University Voinovich School of Leadership and Public Affairs concluded Ohio will benefit from $9.6 billion in one-time construction phase impacts and an additional $2.7 billion in impacts over the life of the projects if 7.5 gigawatts are built. We are well on our way to reaching 7.5 gigawatts. I believe in the OPSB process from pre-app to under construction, you're roughly 6.5 gigs right now, so we're well on our way. Additionally, project financing directly benefits local communities. Ohio's payment in lieu of taxes or pilot program, which you heard on the video, sends revenue directly to the local community. This program ranges from $7,000 to $9,000 per megawatt per year. As an example, if a project provides 100 megawatts of power, the pilot payment to the local community would be approximately $900,000 per year. Depending on the project, this payment would be made annually for approximately 40 years. If we applied this to the 7.5 gigawatts I mentioned earlier, that would translate to over $67 million a year in pilot payments directly to local governments for decades. So what's the issue? This legislation creates a risk profile for solar developers that will cause them to go to other states with a more business-based approach to infrastructure siting. As we sit here, the Indiana legislature is attempting to pass legislation that puts the authority to approve solar projects at the state level, so they can take advantage of this once-in-a-generation opportunity for massive growth. This legislation unfairly singles out what is the most benign and low-impact form of generation we have in this state and attempts to prevent it. I could make a strong argument that a solar farm has less impact on the land than farming corn or beans. If we're about to subject solar development to a local referendum, then let's be fair about it and do it for everything people might have questions about. I struggle to understand the logic of forcing solar to a popular vote subject to emotion, misinformation, and manipulation when development like fossil fuel plants, nuclear plants, shopping malls, subdivisions, and some types of farming operations are left out. After construction, solar isn't seen, it isn't heard, it isn't smelled, it doesn't cause traffic or strain on local resources, and it's decommissioned at the end of the useful life of the project. This bill is a slippery slope that has already started slipping. Last session, it was wind, and this session it's wind and solar. What will be next session? If after listening to this, you're wondering why in the world would we pass legislation to prevent solar development in Ohio and miss out on all these great benefits, you'd be in good company. Business, labor, agriculture, educators, utilities, and many more Ohioans oppose this legislation. You have heard and are going to hear from a lot of people with a lot of solid, factually based, and accurate reasons why solar development is great for our state. Good news for a change. Ohioans should be excited about our bright future. We've got a lot going for us. This is good news at a time that seems full of bad news. In the coming years, we'll be able to say we transitioned from a fossil fuel giant to a clean energy giant, and that is something to be proud of. Jared, you want to come on up and talk about the Power Siting Board?
Before Jared begins, you may see, because I know some of you, this is your first time here, you're going to see people going in and out of this committee because they either have a committee, I know the majority has a caucus, but we're just going to continue with the testimony because I know it's very important to you, so we'll just continue. But you'll see people moving in and out, which you've already have done, and that's the reason why. So,
Thank
go
you.
ahead, Jarrett.
I'll try to be brief then. Thank you. Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee, my name is Jared Wren. I'm a Senior Development Associate at Hecate Energy. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition to this legislation. It is a tremendous honor to testify before this committee and to discuss this important topic with you today. I'm a lifelong resident of the state of Ohio, born and raised in the Green Hills of Athens County, with the first members of my family settling in eastern Ohio in the early 19th century. My wife Lydia and I currently reside in Jefferson Township, Franklin County. I'm a proud alumnus of Ohio University. I'm very proud of my Bobcats in the NCAA tournament and proud of Coach Jeff Bowles there. I joined Hecate Energy in 2014 and have been involved with the development of renewable energy projects, specifically utility-scale photovoltaic solar installations throughout the United States. A brief introduction to my company, Hecate Energy. Hecate was founded in 2012 and has entered into over 2.1 gigawatts of renewable power purchase agreements, or PPAs, across 62 PPAs with 31 counterparties. Hecate Energy has been active in Ohio since 2016 with a total of 365 megawatts certified via the Ohio Power Siting Board's process. The 300 megawatt Highland Solar Farm The 300-megawatt Highland Solar Farms OPSB application received its certificate of environmental compatibility and public need in May of 2019, and the 65-megawatt Newmarket Solar 1 project was granted a certificate last Thursday. Both projects will now be working through the post-certification and pre-construction OPSB compliance items necessary to begin construction. These projects represent millions in revenue for Highland County and the applicable school districts via their agreements with the Highland County Commissioners, who voted to approve those pilot agreements. These projects will pay more than $120 million to local taxing entities in Highland County over the life of the projects. I field calls and emails every day from folks all over the state of Ohio that are eager to have an opportunity to work on the construction and operation of these projects. The prospects of helping to put hundreds of my fellow Ohioans to work in this state on projects close to home is incredibly exciting. In my role as a developer with Hecate Energy, I'm engaged in development activities beginning with site acquisition all the way through to construction. Depending on a project size, it can typically take 12 to 18 months to achieve full site control and prepare and file an interconnection application with PJM, which kicks off a 2 to 3 year PJM study process. As we begin to engage a community, developers typically focus first on working with individual landowners willing to participate in the project and gradually add contiguous acreage over time. As site control is achieved, the litany of field studies necessary to file an application at the OPSB are started. I will discuss both these studies and local engagement in greater detail. As activity around a project site increases and preliminary analysis gives a positive indication for the viability of a site, developers typically spend more and more time engaging with the adjacent, non-participatory landowners and community stakeholders, as well as elected leadership. When I am discussing solar development with folks in the project area, either around the kitchen table or standing outside around my pickup truck in the driveway, there are a few concepts that I work very hard to convey. First of all, that my company and the project we intend to develop is not a nameless, faceless entity attempting to approach by stealth and drop a project next door without their knowledge. In fact, it is quite the opposite. I am there to hear their concerns, convey that I understand and respect those concerns, and be transparent about our intentions as it relates to development in their community. We encourage public participation, not shy away from it. It is the best way for a developer to learn about the concerns of the area in which we are developing, and most importantly, integrate those concerns into our project design and development approach so as to mitigate as many impacts as possible up front. We want to actively engage in a constructive dialogue with all community stakeholders, which ultimately helps deliver a more positive outcome for everyone involved. I'd like to briefly now describe the OPSB application process, including the exhaustive list of development studies necessary to even apply for a certificate. Having completed this process over years for hundreds of megawatts of solar generation, I can say without equivocation that it is robust, it is rigorous, and it is equitable. As demonstrated by these slides, let me just see if I can hit down. Whoops. There we go. And I believe you all have a copy of all these slides, so I'll briefly just mention it here. As demonstrated by these slides, a helpful way to envision this process is as a cost-benefit analysis so that the public interest is ensured and that the project's negative impacts are mitigated with specific permitting requirements. An energy project has benefits and impacts, and the OPSB balances the scales by mitigating the negative impacts, as demonstrated there in our little scales. I'd further add that SB 52 and HB 118 put a thumb on that scale, regardless of the factual analysis or public benefit. And I'll briefly describe these studies down the list. The Ohio Power Siting Board requires studies for complete application. The required studies are as follows: a feasibility study and system impact study conducted by PJM, the regional transmission operator, equipment manufacturing specifications, vegetation management plan, economic impact and land use study, critical issues analysis, complaint resolution and construction notices, liability insurance, construction route study, decommissioning plan and performance bond, geotechnical engineering study, hydrologic study, wetland and water body delineation report, glare analysis and application to the Federal Aviation Administration for review, sound level assessments, threatened and endangered species habitat survey and coordination with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services and Ohio Department of Natural Resources, cultural resource records review and study and concurrence by the Ohio State Historical Preservation Office, a visual resources study and impact mitigation plan, an emergency action plan, stormwater pollution prevention plan, spill prevention and countermeasure plan, national pollutant discharge elimination system. An increased threshold for facility design and engineering is also required. Some of these were traditionally not required until post-certificate prior to construction, but are now required upfront as a part of a complete application. The solar industry has responded to that need of the OPSB by incorporating these additional items into application prior to filing, which demonstrates the industry's desire to work collaboratively and be responsive to the perceived needs identified by the siting board. The OPSB outreach process includes the following: a local public information meeting no more than 90 days before the application is filed, at least 5 months of investigation by the OPSB staff once the application is filed. The investigation includes further coordination with sister agencies and discovery by OPSB staff. The case can be suspended if there is a need for more investigation, and OPSB staff will recommend denial and/or approval of additional conditions based on that investigation. There's an opportunity to file comments and intervene throughout the process. However, intervention includes the right to conduct extensive discovery and appeal rights. There are local public hearings pre, during, and after the process. A local public hearing while the application is in front of the board, an evidentiary hearing, as well as letters and newspaper notices notifying the landowners and local officials in the community of the public information meetings and hearings. The OPSB does not approve an application unless all of these studies are complete and its coordinations finalized. I will conclude my testimony by reiterating the excruciating level of detail that the OPSB requires and its emphasis on local engagement. The incorporation of project-specific impact mitigation tailored to each certificate ensures approved projects represent overwhelmingly positive public benefit with mitigation of impacts on the communities in which they are developed. As a proud child of Appalachia, it is truly exhilarating to be at the tip of the spear as it relates to the deployment of this technology and the positive impact that it will have on rural communities like the one I'm from. I would encourage the members of this committee to reconsider the proposed legislation in light of the detail presented by my colleagues and I. Utility-scale solar development means job creation, increased local revenues, environmental sustainability, and economic diversification. It is a part of Ohio's deep tradition of entrepreneurship, innovation, regional leadership, and I encourage this body to facilitate its growth, not to stifle it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Jared. And if it's okay with the committee, I'm going to bring one more person up that's from the company, and then if the committee has any questions. So, Mike Vogt, welcome, and then we'll have a chance for everybody to ask questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee. My name is Mike Volpe. I'm a Vice President at Open Road Renewables and a founding USEC member. I'd like to quickly add to what Jared shared regarding the solar development process, but more importantly, I'm here today to dispel a lot of the misinformation you guys have heard about solar. That's what I'm here today. You guys have heard a lot, and unfortunately, some of what you've heard hasn't been fully factual. As a bit of background, Open Road has been actively developing projects in Ohio for the last 5 years, and the first project that we kicked off is the 200-megawatt Hillcrest project down in Brown County. That project is nearing completion and has employed hundreds of Ohio workers. In fact, I think at its peak, it employed nearly 900 workers on site. That project will provide clean power to the residents of the local area and generate $1.8 million a year to the local taxing entities. Over the 40-year useful life, that's over $70 million without any services required from the local government. I think you guys have heard some uncertainty about the pilot revenue from solar facilities, but it's sort of unclear where that's come from because we've worked directly with the development services agencies and county auditors to confirm that the pilot revenue will in fact be generated. Additionally, folks often hear fuzzy math when it comes to how much power a renewable facility will generate. The 200 megawatt Hillcrest project will generate enough electricity for 35,000 homes on an annual basis. So this is one project interconnecting to an existing substation that's nearing completion that'll generate enough power for 35,000 homes just by capturing the sun's energy. During the development of Hillcrest, we met with more than 50 families to educate them about the project, discuss their interest in participating, and hear their concerns. Many chose to participate in the project, and others chose to pass. Contrary to what you've heard in this committee, not a single one of our landowner agreements has a gag order in it, limiting the landowner's ability to say whether they're in the project or not. None of our projects have gag orders in them. We don't know where that's coming from. While some of the opponents of solar will have you believe that solar developers are sneaking around in the dead of night in stealth mode, trying to develop projects without letting them know what's going on, our general practice is to meet with county commissioners, township trustees, the schools, economic development office, and members of the community before submitting an application to the siting board process. This is what it's all about. You engage with the community, you understand where the hot spots are, you take those concerns into account before submitting an application. A relevant example of this is a project under development by a competitor south of Lima, which, as I understand things, is a key reason that solar is in this bill. The project originally had a 2,600-acre footprint, 300 megawatts in size, generated enough electricity for about 50,000 homes. After hearing feedback from the community, that developer has offered numerous concessions, reducing the project footprint from 2,600 acres to 1,400 acres, proposed significant setbacks from homes and high-use roads, and offered a one-time payment in the way of a good neighbor agreement to offset the temporary nuisance from the construction activities. Again, this was all done before the siting board application was submitted on that project. When we engage with local communities, we hear a handful of concerns. Chief among them is that solar will ruin the familiar views of Ohio's pleasant rural landscape. We respect this perception and take it seriously. We are talking about whether our business will impact the look and feel of a local community, and that matters. But in reality, members of this committee may drive by any number of solar projects a handful of years after construction and not know they've driven by a solar project. To illustrate this point, I'd like to direct the committee to a few visual simulations that we put together that are included on your desk and included in the slides here. Let's see if I can do this properly. Here we go. What we have shown are a solar array on a rural agricultural tillable land with and without screening at different distances from the pedestrian viewer. As you can see, with effective vegetative screening at 100 foot, the solar facility is less visible. As you extend the distance from the viewer to 300 foot, the solar project becomes less visible. When you add vegetative screening and distance, you can effectively make the solar project disappear. The local view shed concern, which is a core concern of local communities, can be addressed through effective vegetative screening plan. We are actively developing a project that will likely be heard at the board in the next few months. And one of the specific conditions that staff, our development team arrived at, is that we will need to generate a vegetative screening plan that's done by a licensed landscape architecture such that the landscaping actually improves the aesthetic of any homeowners that have direct line of sight to the array. I believe that there will be a presenter who is a landscape architect who's going to present after us, a Columbus-based firm who we've worked with, who will talk about exactly what can be done to mitigate the view shed further. Related to views, we often hear concerns that solar will reduce the value of their neighbor's land. We take this concern to heart, as our homes are often a key source of wealth. That's a big deal. If a neighbor at home is going to do something that's going to impact my property value, I would have a concern too. But what about a solar farm would cause nearby property values to decline? If we can take a look at the visual simulation, it's not the view shed, it's not noise, it's not light, it's not odor, it's not dust, and once operational, there aren't any traffic impacts from a solar facility. It's about as passive a land use as you can have. We all like to think of ourselves as real estate experts. I know my wife certainly does. But the real experts do not find that solar has an adverse effect on land values. In my written testimony, I provided the most recent documentation of what the experts say, and I'm going to grab a quote out of that. All of the studies found either a neutral impact or, ironically, a positive impact where values on properties after the installation of solar farms went up. This increase may be driven by increased local revenue to schools or other infrastructure projects. But again, there's a breakdown between perception of how it's going to impact property values, which is understandable, and the reality. We also appreciate that farmers' ability to effectively drain their fields to dial in crop yields through drain tile is a very important part of Ohio's agricultural industry. We also appreciate that drain tile sometimes crosses property boundaries and acts like a shared public utility with a shared maintenance obligation amongst different neighbors. Solar projects don't want flooded ground either. In the same way that it's not good for crop, it's not good for the land underneath a solar farm. The siting board realizes all of this, which is why its rules require that applicants explain how their project may impact drain tile and what's being done to address it. A couple of weeks ago, in this committee, maybe at this lectern, you heard from a neighbor on one of our projects where she talked about her fear that her fields would be flooded because of the solar project. That's a very valid concern. If there was going to be some change in land use right next to me and my well-being was going to be impacted about it, I'd be concerned too. I think that is a very valid concern. What she didn't share, though, unfortunately, is that we worked proactively for months with the siting board staff, county commissioners, township trustees, Soil and Water Conservation District, county engineer, and the Farm Bureau to arrive at a set of conditions that are detailed on how we address drain tile. They require us to locate all drain tile prior to construction, including any of the mains that go to the neighbor's land. If we impact drain tile during construction, to promptly repair it, and the local Soil and Water Conservation District and siting board staff serve as an oversight role. Our extensive efforts to address the neighbors' concerns about drain tile, while those concerns are valid, was not presented to you in this committee. Although it's worth noting again, through the siting board process, which is formal, it's legally binding, we have arrived at a set of permit conditions to mitigate the impacts. Just like Jared showed in his slides, there will always be impacts and there will always be benefits, but it's the imposition of siting board permitting conditions that balances the scale in the interest of the public and the local community. Another common misconception is that solar panels are made up of toxic materials. They're not. Solar panels are mainly glass, metal, and plastic with an extremely thin layer of semiconducting material encapsulated by glass that enable it to function. There are no liquids that can spill. In fact, nearly all solar panels that will be installed are qualified under EPA regulations at the end of their life to be disposed in a common municipal landfill, just like household garbage. But 2 weeks ago in this committee, you heard a claim that solar is 300 times more toxic than nuclear per unit of energy. This is a great example of the misinformation that we face out in the field. The original source comes from a paid nuclear industry advocate. The methodology he used for the claim explains the sleight of hand. He compared the weight of spent nuclear rods, fuel rods, to the weight of solar panels on a per unit of energy. The difference is we put spent nuclear rods in casts that are protected because the radioactive material stays radioactive for hundreds of years, or we bury them deep under the ground, whereas we can put solar panels at the end of life in a common municipal landfill. It's sort of like an example of saying drinking a whole pot of coffee is worse than drinking a small cup of benzene, where benzene is known to cause leukemia because the pot of coffee is larger than the cup of benzene. Just so we're all on the same page. I'm not anti-nuclear, we're not anti-nuclear, but the comment made by the proponent in this committee 2 weeks ago highlights the disinformation that's swirling out there and the key reason the solar industry is so concerned about this bill. The last topic I'd like to cover is how the siting board process works. Jared walked through it, but I'll just hit on a few points. It's the balancing of the scales. It's what this body has determined is the appropriate approach to balancing the impacts, the benefits. It's very technical. All of the staff are engineers. We have different areas of expertise at the siting board. That's how we try to achieve the best outcome for the public. With this perspective in mind, there's a few critical flaws with the bill. First, it adds an unprecedented arbitrary kill switch to solar projects. After the siting board wields a microscope and scalpel to investigate all of the concerns, this bill introduces a flamethrower to burn it all down. Additionally, the bill imposes a referendum subject to the kind of misinformation that I just walked through in my testimony. Again, this is why we're so concerned, and as the old adage goes, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth can put its boots on. We are concerned about an energized vocal minority in local communities' ability to kill projects based upon misinformation. Additionally, and as we can all talk openly, this bill puts a punitive approach to siting solar facilities that's not seen on other technologies that are still cited at the siting board. While things can always be improved, the siting board process is thorough, and we're currently engaged in the 5-year rule review process. In fact, one of the bill sponsors in the Senate submitted testimony to the 5-year rule review process. Utility Scale Solar Energy Coalition submitted comments. I would argue that any improvements to the siting board process should be done through the 5-year rule review process because of the technical expertise that is housed at the siting board. The sponsors of the bill claim that this is not anti-solar, it's not anti-business, but what business or industry would undergo years of development effort, engaging with the local community, millions of dollars, a 15-month siting board process, all to undergo a local popular vote, where that vote is subject to misinformation. In closing, if you hear from your constituents that they are concerned about a solar project coming to your community, my sincere ask to you is to ask them, what are they hearing from the developer? What are their concerns? Where is the conversation about screening, about where the fence line will be? Because the truth of the matter, the goal of the exercise is not to kill solar projects, it's to balance the interest. The interest of the participating landowners and their property rights, the interest of the non-participating landowners in their views, their property values, drain tile concerns, all of those valid concerns, and the interest of the public of electricity and local tax revenue to the schools. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Okay, thank you, and we'll have, the three that just, Mr. Volpe, Mr. Wren, and Mr. Raffeld. Are there any questions for any of them? I have one question, Mr. Volpe. You'd mentioned that you worked with Farm Bureau with probably soil and water, but you didn't mention, did you work with the landowner too on that? Was he or she part of this meeting?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I can't specifically say to that landowner, but there is a group of organized opposition in that project called the Concerned Citizens of Preble County, who are a party to the case. It is the Alamo Solar Project in Preble County, and they are a party to the case. They have chosen to not arrive at the settled conditions. I believe there's 31 or 32 conditions that have been imposed on the project in the settlement that we all arrived at these conditions. The parties that were party to that settlement were the entities that I spoke to.
Okay, all right. Representative Seitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. You make a good case. This is for Mr. Wren, I think. You went through the exhaustive list of things that must be presented at the OPSB, and that's accurate. I was involved in drafting a lot of that, as you know. But what I didn't hear is any requirement that either wind or solar be subjected to the Ohio Basic Building Code and the various building code restrictions, so I guess my question is, and maybe you're just gonna confine your answer to solar because that's all you know about, but are you subject to the Ohio Basic Building Code, county building codes, municipal building codes, for the structures that you erect? And if you know, is wind subject, because my understanding is very clear, wind is not, because they claim exemption by reason of being a windmill. There is an exemption for windmills in the Ohio Basic Building Code. So they can build a 700-foot tall building or a 700-foot tall turbine and not have to comply with the building code. But that's them, and you're different. So, but I'm asking first about solar, and then whether you know about wind.
Did you want to answer that?
Anybody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Seitz. The answer to that question is that Ohio Revised Code exempts solar specifically in the construction. The operations and maintenance is subject to local building codes. I'm going to assume wind is the same, but I'm not familiar with that. We'll ask we're going to phone a friend here. Is that accurate?
Just state your name and I'll have you fill out a witness slip.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative, my name is Dylan Borchers. I'm with the law firm of Bricker and Eckler, and have represented a number of developers at the Ohio Power Siting Board. Representative, specifically to your question, the generating facility, so including solar, is exempted under 4906.13 under the general preemption provision. So the generating facility and those components do not have local building code, state building code application. However, we have seen conditions recently in Power Siting Board certificates requiring operation and maintenance buildings and fence lines and other things be subject to local building.
Representative Seitz, any? Representative Wilkin?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. As someone that has several of these projects in his district, I do have some concerns I want to raise and get some answers to, if you can. The first one, in regards to the pilot payments, there has been some things said along the lines of, well, whatever the pilot payment that would go to the schools, that then the state funding of schools is reduced by that same amount. So there's really no gain for the schools. Can you tell me if that's accurate or not accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that is inaccurate. The pilot payments don't impact school funding at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I build on that? We've actually engaged with Aaron Roush, a director at the Department of Education, to confirm that answer, that the pilot proceeds do not impact the need-based funding from the schools. Thank you.
Okay. Any other follow-up? Yeah.
Thank you.
Follow-up?
Thank you. So I guess kind of a two-part question here. First, I guess the simple way to put it is those property owners who sometimes, it might be the property it's all the property they own that butts up to a development like this. What are you required? Is there any requirement as to how you deal with them? And if there is or isn't, if there is, what is that? If there's not, then how do you typically deal with property owners that have some of the concerns that you've said? It affects the value or things like that.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, Representative, to that I would say that I would point to the Power Siting Board certificate compliance and specifically the stipulations therein as it relates to the impact mitigation, as it relates to view shed, setbacks, noise mitigation if necessary, depending on the location of the residence in question. But I think there's, and that's one of the things that I mentioned in my testimony, that through active participation in the community, we can ascertain the concerns or the perhaps issues that a adjacent non-participatory landowner could express as it relates. If they have a concern about the way it's going to look, that can help to inform the way we would mitigate that impact, as with view shed and landscaping plans, for example. So it starts at the upfront in the process when we go around the project area and have engage in dialogue with folks and hear their concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
Follow?
I apologize, but I do have several of these in my area, and I just want to clarify.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, back to the property owner. What if you have a property owner that you can't come to an agreement with that's next to it? Is there a final way to resolve that, or is it? And I guess first of all, did you guys answer? Is there a requirement as to how or how you engage with adjoining property owners?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, great question. There is a requirement that we reach out to local neighbors as part of the public information meeting process at the very front end of the siting board process. Best practice is to engage with them before the statutorily required engagement. When there's a public information meeting held by the siting board, there's a notice that's required to be published locally and letters that have to be mailed out, certified, that a certain distance from the project footprint has to be engaged with, let them know about the public information meeting, et cetera. The question of when we have neighbors that still have concerns, the best practice is to work with them to try and find an approach that works for everybody. The simplest thing to do is to relocate the fence line further away from their home, commit to certain things that they would have an interest in, maybe even plant hedgerows on their property line in addition to screening the project here. There's also commercial remedies. There are things like good neighbor agreements where compensation can be provided. There's the ability for us to make an offer for their home. If they're really that concerned, we'll offer to buy a home because we believe that the home will hold its value. We'll buy it. We'll sell it after the project's built or during the construction. If we're still unable to resolve those concerns, the arbiter is the Power Siting Board, where the board takes a lot of recommendation from the staff and the administrative law judge. Staff goes out into the field and they look at the vantage point from the concerned neighbor. They really investigate it. They then ask the applicant to propose a handful of solutions, and then staff will determine whether what has been proposed is sufficient or not. Staff will make that recommendation to the administrative law judge. Administrative law judge makes that recommendation to the board. In the event that the citizen is still unhappy, the citizen has a right to be a formal intervener in the case and has the ability to contest the project. That's not the outcome we're looking for in any of these situations. We work extremely hard to try and find a compromise outcome. And if you're hearing of projects that are under development where there are neighbors that have concerns that are legitimate and we work hard to address them and they're still not addressed, the more that folks in this room can encourage people to sit down and try and really understand what it's going to take to get it done, that's sort of the role, that's the job, that's what a developer does. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes. One more.
Yep, go ahead. Follow
Thank you,
up.
Chairman. What is taken into consideration when you are looking at the construction phase and you have a home nearby, if you have kids nearby, how written in stone, I guess, is the best way to put it, are your entrances, exits, if people are showing up in the morning, if it's school buses on the highway, things like that. You know, we're doing in a lot of rural areas where there are kids staying outside waiting on the bus and things like that. How are those things either negotiated out or taken into consideration?
Mr. Chairman, Rep. Wilkin, that's a really great question because the reality is this economic development opportunity is going to result in a lot of folks coming to the site to build a project. The siting board recognizes that and they impose conditions through the stipulation that provide when construction can take place during daylight hours, a certain set of days of the week. They require a traffic management plan in coordination with the Department of Transportation, the local sheriffs. There are many other things that are done to ensure that there's coordination with that. And I believe you'll have projects that are starting construction maybe later this year in your district. And the more that there can be coordination between the general contractor who's building the project and Department of Transportation, local sheriffs, et cetera, to arrive at a plan where that plan may have to stay dynamic and continue to be worked through the process, I think the better the outcome will be. And the siting board obligates the project to take those steps for coordination. And then, the effectiveness of the coordination just requires everybody trying to do their best job and make tweaks as we go along. Thank you.
Okay.
Last one.
Yep, go ahead. Representative Wilkin?
Again, thank you, Chairman. Kind of go off, the terms never and forever, two very hard things to achieve. So what happens in the event a drastic hailstorm that damages so many panels, it's not worth continuing? And maybe that's a far-fetched question, but I guess I'm just asking, when the landowner or the county or the schools have come to an agreement, or they know what their payment, the pilot payment will be, how does that work if for some reason the project lifespan was shortened?
Mr. Chairman, Rep. Wilkin, great question. First, there's casualty insurance that all of these projects carry. The way that these projects are capitalized, it's probably similar to like a commercial real estate transaction where there's an equity sponsor and there's a lender. These are big dollar projects, hundreds of millions of dollars. The lender only gets the loan repaid if the project can keep generating electricity. So there's covenants in the debt that obligate casualty insurance, certain O&M standards, et cetera. If that breaks down and there's a black swan event and everything goes to hell, the siting board on every project that has been certified requires a bonded decommissioning bond prior to construction from an Ohio licensed engineer stamp to say, we look at the cost of removal, we look at the scrap value, and you're going to have to actually post security before moving an inch of dirt so that the local community doesn't have a situation where a tragic event comes in and then, the land is just sitting there with a half-complete solar project. The good news is there's aligned incentives to make these projects work, and you sort of rely on the capital interest of the equity sponsor and the lender to have those protections. But if that still doesn't work, there's the fail-safe of the bonded decommissioning obligation.
Okay. Representative Lanise.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add something that.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Chairman, Representative
Go
Wilkin.
ahead.
I know you said your question was maybe far-fetched, but I would share with you that one of our members, First Solar, out of Perrysburg, that actually makes the panels, they have a video with testing where they actually fire at a very high velocity golf balls and hail, and they twist them and they bend them and try to get them to break. They're very, very strong. But I'll see if I can get hold of that video and send it to you.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Representative Lanise.
Thank you, Chair. My question has to do with the costs of House Bill 118. In the fiscal analysis, there's a general statement that there will be millions lost in property values, property tax value. My question is, has there been an independent cost analysis that piles on all of the costs to House Bill 118? So in addition to property value, we're going to have construction jobs that will be lost. We'll have the production costs, presumably if they are made from First Solar, one of the largest solar panel producers in the world, and it's here in Ohio. But also the big corporation jobs that could be lost, be they big tech or other manufacturing firms that are looking for renewable energy. So and then of course there are the savings that we'll get from the energy, the contributions to the grid and the decrease in the energy prices. So if you start to pile these all on, this seems like an extremely expensive bill. And I'm just wondering if anybody has done a global macro analysis of the costs of this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lanise, we had commissioned an economic development study by Howard University that I referenced in my testimony that has some numbers that I think get close to what you're talking about. And I think that there's at least one point where Dr. Gilbert Michaud and his team give a number of, is it $57 billion?
Something big enough
It's enormous that if this happens, the state will enjoy the benefit. Some of the things you talked about are outside, I believe are outside of his study, so it's probably going to be larger. And there are many, many downstream effects that, as we all know, that are real, but they're very difficult to quantify and sort of point to. Mike, you want to add anything to
Okay, well, if you have anything, bring it through the chair and we'll get it out to the committee if something comes up. Any other question? Representative Stein?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. First, I think I'd like, if I could, just to make a statement in general about there's obviously huge differences between a wind development project and a solar development project. And our interests, at least personally from the perspective of the citizens we represent in our district, relate predominantly to the wind development. I appreciate your examples of showing how you can mitigate view issues and try to bring that into a situation where people feel less concerned about what you're doing, and certainly applaud you for doing that. I try in my mind to then equate that to this past weekend. I had an opportunity to go with my sons to pick up a small puppy over in Paulding County, and had a chance to take a few photographs and stand near some of these 400 or 500 foot towers and go, that's a lot of landscaping. let's face it, it's not possible. But just to be fair, my original assessment for House Bill 118 did revolve predominantly about wind, not so much solar, because that's the issue of the residents of our area. And things like the interest in gag orders in contracts was related to, again, written documents I've personally seen related to contracts for wind development, not for contracts related to solar. So I want to be fair in saying that you certainly come in from a different perspective and offer a different perspective than what I've seen personally in terms of interactions with citizens locally. Now, I did feel that I had our eyes opened a bit last week in testimony when one of the solar folks did put a graphic up on the monitor showing, and I happened to take a picture of it, a solar farm that had, it looks like 3 homes pretty much encapsulated on all 365 degrees with solar array. Now, it's a little misleading because I don't know what you show a distance of 100 foot versus 300 foot and what that means in terms of screening. So obviously, it's hard to tell, but certainly in that perspective, or from that perspective, the idea of allowing for the purchase of that property, or at the minimum some type of a purchase guarantee to say that, okay, if your property drops, I was happy to hear you mention in your testimony that we would even go as far as to look at buying out that property if we had
Mr. Stein, do you have a question?
I have several, but I'm just trying to.
Okay.
Since this was my bill, I'm hoping to get a little latitude on,
okay,
on trying
thanks.
to have a more comprehensive understanding. But
okay.
In terms of price guarantees, would you allow, do you believe legislation that said that you need a price guarantee or the ability to buy properties in this situation where I've got 3 encapsulated homes surrounded on all sides? Would that be objectionable or cause issues in terms of future development for your projects?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stein, in the obtuse, it's a very difficult question to answer. The way that I would think about it is, what do the technical experts at the siting board, with all the factual information at hand, determine on whether that is a needed condition to balance the scales? It is very difficult from the vantage point of an aerial to know whether that's 2, 3, 4 football fields away. We don't know. We don't know what the impact of property values are. If there is data that shows that that particular home around that cluster of panels is going to be significantly impacted, or impacted enough to have a notable detrimental impact, that should be part of the process, and the siting board staff should think about that and go down that path. This bill has no element of that in it, though. I mean, the gradient of trying to find a real fine-tuning of the balancing of interest versus what's proposed in this bill, there's such a large delta in that we formed USEC for these conversations, for the good faith, constructive, sit around the table, hash it out. Solar is coming. The opportunity is here. We want to keep working together. We were looking forward to testifying because we want to work with this committee And if that's where this goes and the process plays out that that's where it goes, then I would say let's keep talking about it, but do it in the right framework, not through the recommendation of a referendum that's subject to disinformation on social media. I mean, that's the big concern with the bill.
Representative
Follow-up?
Stein, follow-up? Yes.
So, and I do understand the idea of the potential, as you've brought up several instances of potential misinformation, at least particularly as it relates to the solar industry and some of the projects you're working on. So I get that. I also look at the fact that we have individual citizens who don't have near the resources or deep pockets to go out and run ad campaigns on radio, TV, and postcard mailers and all of the other pieces and ways in which you can try to solicit, much like a political campaign, a particular outcome to a particular vote. These individuals don't have that at their disposal. So to a certain degree, I feel like there's a bit of a differential here in terms of when I look at what the individual citizen is able to do, even in terms of interveners with the Power Siting Board and how that process works. What would your comment be to the fact that these are individuals who, as a whole, don't have the resources to run against a large media campaign that other companies that want to see this referendum move forward would have?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stein, we're not recommending the referendum. The only need for the media campaign is if we go the referendum route. The locals should have confidence in the Siting Board staff. They should have confidence that they can submit public comment, no effort. They can show up to all the hearings. They can formally intervene. If we need to continue improving the process, that's why we're here. We want to keep improving it. We submitted comments. We submitted 10 pages of comments. If you look in the appendix of my written testimony to the Siting Board 5-year rule review, it's not perfect. We'll keep massaging it. But the question of what's your response to the ability to outspend the locals on a referendum, we're not recommending the referendum.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Stein, just a quick addition to that. I think that it's sort of left out in the analysis, though, are the property rights of the landowners and the farmers, who I know are feeling like, wait a minute, why does that man or woman over there get to say what happens with my property? This property is within the law. What I'm doing with my own property is within the laws of the state. My family, we are farmers. We're Christmas tree farmers, and we would jump at the chance to lease 100 acres for 30 years at this kind of money, because you don't have to go out and bust your butt for it. It comes in. So we would jump at that chance, and we would be frustrated by neighbors saying, hey, I don't really want to look at solar panels. I prefer to look at your trees.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up, or Mr. Representative Stein, follow-up?
I'm good for the time.
Okay, thank you.
Chairman.
Well, I want to thank you for Representative Ray.
Thank you, Chairman Hoops. I just have one question. I'm relatively new to all this, but as I read the bill, it also potentially sets up a referendum situation for any certificate amendment. How frequently are amendments filed, and would that kind of put you in a perpetual situation where you're going through that process to adopt this?
Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, it's a great question. The way the development process plays out, there are unforeseen reasons that you would need to come back and submit the request for an amendment, like the proposed interconnection approach to the overhead transmission lines, based upon things that are out of our control. So there may be unforeseen things that, as you go through the process, you actually need to make tweaks, where the tweak would require an amendment. A lot of it doesn't require amendment, but that does is a large exposure, and another reason that we're really concerned with what's been proposed in the bill. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for your testimony. I know this is really confusing me, because last week we had testimony that basically said there wasn't communication, and you're saying there is, so that's something we're going to have to look at, because I think that's the main thing, is people being able to state their case and have a process where they feel that they're being heard. So thank you for coming in, and we'll continue the discussion. Thank you. Our next witness is Brian Kinzelman, Senior Principal CEO of MKSK Incorporated. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'll keep this brief. I'm sure we're all fatigued by now. Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee, thank you very much for this opportunity to submit opposition testimony to House Bill 118. Again, my name is Brian Kinzelman. I'm Senior Principal and CEO of MKSK. MKSK is an Ohio corporation headquartered in Columbus, providing landscape architecture and planning services on a very wide variety of project types. Those projects include community planning for municipalities and institutions, higher education and healthcare, campuses, parks and open spaces, riverfronts, transportation, facilities, and private development. We currently employ 95 people in 8 locations, from Detroit to Atlanta, and with Ohio offices in Columbus and Cincinnati. Our projects include the Crew Stadium, the Scioto Mile, and the Arena District Planning here in Columbus. Many of you are familiar with those, I trust. Around the state, we've had the great good fortune of designing the Canton Centennial Plaza, Toledo Promenade Park, and Blue Ashes Summit Park. As a bit of personal background, I've been working in this profession for 48 years, hence the gray hair. I am licensed landscape architect in Ohio and 6 other states, a member of the Council of Fellows for the American Society of Landscape Architects, accredited as a professional planner by the American Institute of Certified Planners, and hold certification in LEED, an acronym for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. While the portfolio of projects that we work on covers a wide range of land uses, project types, and aesthetic goals, I'm here today to talk about the emerging solar industry and work we've been engaged in for many months. Environmental stewardship, which includes clean air and water, are at the core of my profession and our practice, period. Through my 44 years in this profession, sound environmental practices, including the use of native species of trees, shrubs, and other landscape solutions, haven't changed much, but use of software tools to accurately simulate views and arrive at ideal design solutions has improved dramatically, making for more concise visualization in the design process and communication to the community. As we understand it, viewshed impact is one of the key concerns of local community members when they first learn of solar projects coming to their community. This is understandable concern given the natural beauty of Ohio's rural landscape. However, we firmly believe that an effective and rigorously produced landscape plan can mitigate the viewshed impact, and when done properly can result in a solar project blending seamlessly into the rural aesthetic while satisfying many other environmental concerns. What we've learned working on these solar projects thus far is this: site-specific designs generally result in heterogeneous plant clusters versus homogeneous evergreen hedgerows, and are much more fitting in the natural Ohio landscape and more environmentally correct solutions. Planting should be smaller in size and a mix of those sizes at installation to improve the rigor as they grow over time. Smaller plants tend to take to transplanting better than larger, and further the naturalization of the landscape. Selecting the right species that require no artificial irrigation after planting is key. Picking the right plants for the right place is critical. Properly designed landscape solutions, as required by the siting board, enhance the enduring ecological condition of the area and further the sustainability of the rural landscape. Additionally, through the use of software modeling tools, we've found that we can vet and optimize the landscape plan for treatment where a neighbor has direct line of sight to a solar array, for example, whereas a less dense solution may be appropriate in a region where the project has further setbacks and no direct line of sight exists. Our aim is to complement and enhance the existing rural vernacular landscape while reducing the visual impact of a given project with carefully designed edges and perimeters, always with an eye towards environmental sustainability and utilizing indigenous pollinator plants. Taken with this added benefit of enhanced flora and fauna communities and stormwater absorption, effective landscape design furthers the sustainability goals of the overall project. One other thought is this: each of these projects calls for a significant amount of nursery stock, plants preferably grown locally or regionally for sake of plant culture compatibility. With the growth of solar in Ohio, an opportunity is created for an expanded market for agricultural products for those Ohio growers. The demand is measurable and real. As I understand it, the proponents of this bill believe that the siting board process needs to be supplemented by a local vote of the community members. That appears unnecessary in my view, given the rigor of our design process and our experience at the siting board and the applicants' meetings with stakeholders, which have resulted in multiple iterations of landscape plan refinement of the project sites on which we have worked. In closing, my experience in the field of landscape architecture, I firmly believe the rural aesthetic can be maintained and even enhanced through thoughtful and professional landscape design. And I stand ready to continue supporting the interests of the local communities where these projects are being proposed. I appreciate your time. I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions? All right, well, thank you for being, oh, I'm sorry, Representative Stein.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question, because as we evolve through today's hearing, one thing that's become to me obvious is the fact that there's a huge difference, obviously, between solar and wind. And I can appreciate what your work and what you're trying to accomplish from an aesthetic standpoint for the citizens who are surrounded by these properties. But would you agree there's no way to utilize those aesthetic properties for a 600-foot wind turbine?
I cannot speak to the screening or the mitigation of wind devices. I can speak to solar.
Thank you.
Any other okay, thank you for being here today. I now would like to bring up Superintendent Chad Eisler and also Todd Mustaine, who's the treasurer from Madison Plains Local School District. Welcome. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee, it is an honor to stand before you today to offer testimony regarding House Bill 118. My name is Chad Eisler, and I am the superintendent for the Madison Plains Local School District. The testimony I offer is in opposition to the bill. My vision for my school district is that we would become a model of excellence in rural education. Excellence in anything requires investment. In education, part of that investment has to be financial. As superintendent, I have to be part educator and part businessman. As a businessman, I understand the importance of diversification in revenue streams. Diversification helps to provide strength by not relying solely on one source for what is needed. That is, for not relying solely on one source for what is needed. This is true for just about any organization, but for rural school districts, it is particularly so. As you likely know, school districts in rural areas have a significant challenge regarding funding and raising revenue. Because of the large amounts of land and square miles that constitute rural school districts, the state views us as being wealthy because of the financial value the land represents. As a result, when it is time to develop the budget for the biennium or look at funding formulas, rural districts often get shortchanged because of the value that is in the land. Because the value is in the land, farmers are understandably reluctant to pass property taxes, which are the primary way schools are funded in Ohio. They are reluctant because even in down years, they still have to write their property tax check, and for farmers, those checks are very large. The net result of this is that rural schools often struggle to adequately generate enough funding or revenue to operate their school districts in comparable ways to excellent suburban districts, where there is more opportunity for industrial-based tax revenue streams. Until this opportunity with the solar farms, industrial-based tax revenue streams have been very limited in my district. Approximately a year and a half ago, we learned that there was potential for 2 solar farms to be developed within the boundaries of our school. As we learned about this, we began to learn about the financial impact that these 2 facilities could have on district finances through the additional diversified revenue streams they represent. If If both of the two proposed solar farms are built to their capacity, our school district stands to receive approximately $3.9 million annually for the next 20, possibly 40 years. With an annual budget of approximately $16 million, an injection of $3.9 million goes a long way towards helping us to stabilize finances, which helps to stabilize operations, which helps to stabilize learning for students within the district. One of the wonderful aspects of these two revenue streams is that they do not cost our district's residents anything. As a result, the tax burden that would normally be asked of the residents would not need to be as high, provided the solar farms are allowed to be developed. In Ohio, each child has the right to a free and appropriate public education. However, as we all know, education is not free. There is an unwritten social contract, a public trust, that exists to provide this for our children, and each generation is responsible to provide for the education of the generation that follows. We don't pay it back, we pay it forward. When I leave here today, I'm driving back to my school district to attend a levy committee meeting. My district is on the ballot this spring. Excellence requires investment, and excellence is important for the children in my school district. They deserve to have access to an excellent education and opportunities that will help them to prepare for their future. As their superintendent, I, along with all superintendents, have to be thoughtful and wise in how I represent and consider the greatest good. Striving to protect the district and enhance it through the realization of additional diversified revenue streams is important, and I ask for your support in doing this. Please join me in opposing House Bill 118. The children of Ohio's schools deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee, I thank you for taking the time to listen to my testimony today opposing House Bill 118. My name is Todd Mustine, and I'm the Treasurer CFO of Madison Plains Local School District. We're in Madison County, just about 40 minutes south of here. I am proud to stand before you all to advocate today on behalf of my Board of Education and my school district regarding this proposed bill. As treasurer of the school district, my main responsibility lies with the numbers and managing the district's finances, so I'll stick with the numbers today. The two solar farm projects in our district at full capacity will generate a calculated $3.9 million per year for the next 20 to 40 years for Madison Plains local schools at no additional cost to the state of Ohio and no additional cost to our local taxpayers. This $3.9 million in annual revenue is equivalent to the following in our district: a 12 mil property tax levy, a 2.125% earned income tax levy, 85% of our annual state foundation funding, 55% of our annual local property tax revenue, 2 times our current annual income tax revenue, and 25% of our total annual general fund budget, based on the $16 million Mr. Eisler just mentioned. This potential unrestricted pandemic-proof revenue generated from the two solar farm projects in our district would help provide the financial stability Madison Plains desperately needs. We are doing our best to stabilize our finances on our own, including passing our first ever earned income tax in 2018, and keeping our costs down to less than 1% annual increases in expenditures per year. However, we know that these efforts alone may not be enough to ensure our long-term financial stability. In fact, without this solar farm revenue, our most recent 5-year forecast projects our district to have a negative general fund balance by 2024. The annual revenue generated from the solar farm projects would be significant in keeping our district in the black for many years to come without having to cut staff or programs, without additional cost to the state of Ohio, and without additional cost to our Madison Plains taxpayers. This $3.9 million in annual solar farm revenue generated on approximately 7 square miles, or 2.8% of our 248 square mile school district, would benefit over 10,000 residents over the next 20 to 40 years. However, if House Bill 118 were to pass, It could all be taken away by a few hundred voters or a few trustees. I applaud the solar farm companies and the landowners they have partnered with that have adhered to every state requirement in order to safely bring such a win-win industry to our district, a win for agricultural landowners, a win for the environment, a win for jobs, a win for public education, and most importantly for Madison Plains Local School District, an annual $3.9 million win for our residents and students. Thank you again for your time and for listening.
Okay, are there any questions? How much is your millage that you're looking at putting on? How much will that be, your levy?
Our current levy up for renewal is our 1.25% earned income tax.
So it's a renewal then?
It's a
Okay,
renewal,
all
correct.
right.
Yeah, it generates approximately $2 million a year for our district.
Okay, all right. Representative Stein?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. I understand your position, and from your side, I would advocate exactly what you're doing for the benefit of the citizens and the students that you represent. My question, I think, is slightly different in that when we look at pilot programs, which from earlier testimony are not included in state funding formulas, and as we see more and more development of renewables and pilots being implemented, from a fairness standpoint, do you believe that's fair and equitable that if I happen to live in a footprint of one of these projects and my school district's the beneficiary, that doesn't, in some way, I'm not saying 100%, but some percentage of that should be for the public good in general and not just for that one system? Could you elaborate, or your thoughts just in general? I know this doesn't relate directly to the question, but it does relate to the energy sector and the questions before us as a whole.
Yeah, so again, you're right. I get the benefit of just advocating on behalf of our district specifically. I left out a lot out of my testimony about the fairness of school funding because it is such a complicated system, and I know that's something that's before the legislature right now, and I apologize for my decorum, Chairman Hoops. Representative.
We'll just stay with this today. Well, funding is another
Yeah,
animal in itself.
So as far as how to appropriately determine how this industry coming into our district should be shared amongst the state in view of state funding, I think that is absolutely a conversation for another time because it is very complicated and complex. What I can say is in our county, with the land use in effect, it is hard and very difficult, and our options are limited for the industry to come in, especially to the southern portion of Madison County that we almost entirely occupy. Agriculture is a huge industry in our district, proudly. We're one of the top 10 corn-producing counties in the state, and we have a great FFA program, by the way. But as far as industry goes outside of that, commercial and industrial, it's very limited. Based on the restricted use of that land and keeping it in agriculture. Doing this in such a way, bringing the solar industry in, is a way to keep that land in agriculture for future use, and also brings a great industry into our district that we otherwise wouldn't have had.
Okay. Okay, I want to thank, any other questions? I want to thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
I now would like to bring up Steve Crum, who's the international representative for the International Brotherhood of Electric Workers. And also I'll bring up Matthew, too, right away. Solowski, see there? Okay. We'll bring them both up. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the House Public Utilities Committee. Thank you for allowing me to provide testimony today. I too am a lifelong Ohio resident and a nearly 40-year member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the IBEW. The IBEW is the largest energy union in the world. We represent over 775,000 members and retirees in the United States properties, and Canada. I have worked thousands of hours in Ohio and neighboring states in the electrical trade. I'm testifying today in opposition to House Bill 118. As written, House Bill 118 would have a negative impact on job creation in Ohio as a deterrent for energy generation projects within our state. The state of Ohio already has a very robust Ohio Power Siting Board process with ample opportunities for participation. It's a process in which experts are the decision makers. In addition to the effective Power Siting Board process, Ohio also has a unique program that makes Ohio desirable for development. Ohio's pilot program incentivizes job creation for Ohio residents by offering beneficial property tax treatment to developers in exchange for commitments that are beneficial to Ohio residents. The requirement I would like to discuss today is the 80% of individuals employed on a solar project must be Ohio residents. The majority of solar projects in the pre-application and pending phases are located in rural Ohio. These communities are the hardest hit by the recession 10 years ago and were among the hardest hit during the COVID pandemic. In addition to unemployment, underemployment is prevalent throughout Ohio. Solar development in these areas has the potential to not only generate revenue within the community that can be used to support critical services and infrastructure, but the IBEW's perspective, solar power can create a pathway to a career in the electrical industry. These areas need jobs that are solar solar development stands to create. A 2020 study by Ohio University on the economic impacts of utility-scale solar within our state found that nearly 55,000 jobs could be created in Ohio during the construction phase of solar projects alone. The same study found that for every direct job created by these projects, one job would be created statewide. The IBEW is excited about these opportunities. We stand ready to partner with developers, contractors, state and community-based organizations, and all interested parties to focus on workforce recruitment and development. The IBEW represents over 20,000 workers in Ohio. These residents are trained, highly skilled, and their jobs are family-sustaining, community-supporting, lifelong jobs. They are careers with room for advancement. I stand before you today as someone who has made a living, supported my family, given back to my community, and when the time comes, I will be able to retire comfortably as a result of jobs like the ones that House Bill 118 stands to negatively impact. I urge you to support Ohio jobs by opposing House Bill 118. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. The IBEW looks forward to continuing its work throughout the state in support of energy jobs for Ohio residents.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crum, for your testimony. Matt, we'll have you come up, and then we'll have a chance for questions, if that's okay. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Good to see you. Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith. Good to be back here in the state capitol and the State House. Please be advised the Affiliated Construction Trades Ohio Foundation, or ACT Ohio, is a 501c5 that was established by the Ohio State Building Trades Council back in 2012 to encourage economic and industrial development opportunities and promote what we consider to be industry best practices for Ohio's public and private construction. For the reasons I'll explain, I offer this testimony as our organization's opposition to HB 118 in its current format. We have long maintained an all-of-the-above strategy with respect to energy generation in the state of Ohio, including our support for coal, solar, wind, natural gas, and of course nuclear power. At more than 80 of our state-of-the-art training facilities across the state, building trades apprentices are acquiring the knowledge and the skills to produce high-quality craftsmanship necessary to support every facet of energy generation and production in the state of Ohio. These state-of-the-art apprenticeship training centers are all 100% privately funded through employer contributions from our partner contractors and member payroll deductions, paycheck deductions from our members. The total taxpayer investment in building trades apprenticeship training programs in the state of Ohio is exactly zero. According to the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, again, these are ODJFS numbers, effective end of 2020, roughly 80% of Ohio's construction industry apprentices are registered in our programs, and that includes 95% of Ohio's female apprentices and 84% of Ohio's minority apprentices. Upon completion of their training, they become an essential part of our industry. As I have said many times, we have profound respect for all of our customers, investors, and colleagues in every sector of the power generation market in the state of Ohio. We appreciate every past, present, and future opportunity to work on combined cycle natural gas burners, most of which, I think there are 5 of them, 5 major in the state of Ohio right now. I think we've done all 5 of them under project labor agreements. The nuclear power facilities, of course, up north, the wind turbines, and in addition to the solar power facilities that I'll be discussing here momentarily. Our apprenticeship training in many instances is specifically geared towards the latest and most cutting-edge technologies so that investors such as the individuals you just heard from can rest assured we can build and maintain anything that they plan for the state of Ohio. Our primary interest with regard to House Bill 118 is directly on the jobs that the solar power generation industry provides our members and their families on an annual basis. We won't get into the pilot program that's been covered here, I think, fairly extensively. We support it. We think that it helps incentivize the investment in the state of Ohio. Steve just mentioned that 80% of those jobs must go to Ohio residents, and that's obviously something that we strongly support and believe that the state got right. I have also attached information from the Ohio Power Siting Board that should be uploaded onto your iPads there, identifying 2 categories of solar development projects, one called approved solar facilities and one called pending and pre-application solar facilities. At a glance, the Ohio Power Siting Board has approved 12 projects, which is up towards the top there in the lighter shade of orange. And there may have been a couple this week. I think I saw a couple of things come through, but I'm not positive. So roughly 12 projects totaling 2,089 megawatts of power. The pending information below in the crimson or dark pink shows an additional 23 projects totaling 4,270 megawatts of power on projects in this pre-application phase or projects that are pending approval. So to give you some scale, we estimate anywhere from 800,000 to 1 million work hours for every 200 megawatts of power produced on these solar projects. And that's based, it's a rough estimate, that's based on what we think we've achieved on the Hillcrest project down in Brown County right now. That's been ongoing for a little over a year, and we're approaching 1 million work hours on that project down there. Just to give you a little bit of background on where I came up with those numbers. Applying this calculus to the pending project list, we're tentatively, and again, roughly discussing between 16 and 20 million work hours for Ohio's building trades workforce over the next several years. And again, I want to stress this is in, as Steve mentioned, particularly in rural counties. If you look at where these counties are located, rural counties where so many of our members reside and where we so desperately need the work. These hours are extremely meaningful to our members and their families. The provisions of House Bill 118 as it currently drafted puts these projects on the pending list at risk. By adding a township level referendum process, many if not all of these projects will simply look to other states where their investment dollar could potentially be more inviting. The referendum process, we feel, just inserts too much risk into the equation and would result in a scattershot approach to solar development that we think would disrupt the momentum we currently have in light of the success of the pilot program and as well as the demand from many of the end users that you've heard about already, seeking this type of power. So for these reasons, we oppose 118 in its current form and certainly urge the committee to find more common ground to address the concerns of proponents, which we're sensitive to. I mean, our members live in townships, and we're sensitive to the concerns of the communities out there. But what we don't want to see is these projects and the millions of work hours that our members could derive from them at risk. So the key is to, we think, find the right balance between continuing to invest and encourage these projects to occur while taking into account any of the additional concerns of the community. So
Great.
I'd be happy to
Thank
take
you.
any questions if there are any. If not,
Are there
I
any
know it's a long
questions?
day.
Representative Troy?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Solazzi. Yeah, and I appreciate your testimony and appreciate the fact that you've indicated that being a fellow building trades member myself, how important apprenticeships are, and the fact that you have retooled your apprenticeship program to deal with these new technologies. I mean, how busy now are your members, you know, on some of these things rather than the traditional, you know, running wire through, you know, new buildings and things like that? Has this been seen a real spurt in work for your members on these particular things?
Through the chair, thank you, Representative Troy. Yes, it's been good. It's been good. Now, again, we're only a couple thousand megawatts into what we think will be billions upon billions of dollars of investment. So we're still very much on the front side of this boom. But you're a building trades guy. You know, hey, we appreciate the work. I mean, for our members, the bottom line is we just want to have, we look for public policy that gives our partner contractors the opportunity to go compete for work and our members the opportunity to go to work and provide meaningfully for their families. And these are jobs that pay well and offer good benefits for health insurance, retirement for members and their families. So we appreciate the opportunity to go to work, as I mentioned, on these projects as well as the others.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up. So you indicated that, and I think you're right, that, you know, with kind of the whole downsizing or kind of frowning upon fossil-based fuels because of the global climate changes and things like that, there's going to be a bigger growth here. And I think your point, I think that these things are going to be built somewhere, and if somehow we restrict those in Ohio, they're going to be built somewhere else, which is going to, you know, be less investment in Ohio and less opportunities for your members right here in Ohio. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Chair, we want to see the energy produced here in Ohio.
Yep.
And the benefit of the jobs that it takes to produce that energy.
Okay, Representative Stein?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony and what your members do for the state of Ohio. Today's conversations have revolved predominantly about lack of support for 118 as it's specific to solar. I noticed at the top of your testimony it mentions wind farms 118 in the title, but we didn't talk about wind. We've spent the majority of today's time reinforcing the idea that solar is a different animal and has a different perspective that should be as it should be viewed in terms of development in the state of Ohio. And after what I've heard today, I would in many ways agree with that statement. How do you view 118 as it relates to 600-foot industrial turbines that can't be camouflaged with a few trees, and that you have, you know, thousands of folks that are driving through, living in those environments, and that object to it? What's your members, your thoughts in general to that perspective of how we balance fairness to that community?
Sure. Through the chair, Representative Stein, thank you for your question. I want to be careful because we have constructed a good number, I don't think all, but a good number of the wind turbines that exist in the state of Ohio right now. We're really excited about the potential of the Icebreaker project. Again, this is a number of wind turbines up Cuyahoga County way, up that way, that, again, that's going to be well off the the coast and into the lake. So we anticipate doing 100% of that work. However, I have driven to Crown Point many times with my daughter for softball, and I've en route seen the massive wind turbines that you're referring to, and I understand the concern. I'm not here to say that in any way, shape, or form, if the wind farms are going to be built in the state of Ohio, we want to build them. But at the end of the day, I do see the distinction that you and others, I think, appear to be making with respect to the community and the agricultural and landscape-esque impact, the distinction between solar and a 600 or 700-foot wind turbine is remarkable. It's certainly a point to be made.
Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Salazzi and Mr. Crum for your testimony. I was going to ask a similar question to Representative Stein in the respect that you've given us, Mr. Salazzi, you've given us a calculation of the amount of work hours. In your testimony, you gave us a calculation of, up to about 1 million work hours for your members for every 200 megawatts of power produced through solar development. And I mean, the research that I've seen from the wind industry basically suggests that they feel like Ohio could quickly jump tenfold in its amount of wind being generated if we could remove some of these impediments to market, which 118 I view as an impediment to market. That being said, have you done a calculation of work hours to megawatts for these potential utility scale wind farms? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair, Representative Smith. I have not. If you give me 1 second, I'll ask Steve. We can get that information potentially for you. I don't have that on hand. I think Steve and I both agree that the potential for work hours for our members is significantly greater for solar than it is for wind. But again, I haven't heard it mentioned here, but the manufacturing market for the component parts for both is significant as well. And again, we have a lot of manufacturing customers in the state of Ohio whose facilities we construct and maintain as well. So something to be considered, but I do not have that information and can certainly look into that, and if I find something that is beneficial, I can provide it. And again, the scale that I provided here in my testimony for the solar is, I just want to, it's not precise, but it is and a rough estimate that gives you some scale for why we are so interested in the bill.
Okay. Well, if you do get some information, just send it through the chair and we'll get it out to everybody. Make it easy on you. So.
Yeah, we'll try to give you another 4-hour Public Utility Committee meeting that you can come back and give us that answer. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Representative Ray.
Chairman Hibbs, thank you. Matt, I just have one question here. I want to make sure I heard something correctly. Is it true you said 80% of the workers on solar projects must be Ohio residents?
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, Steve.
The pilot program requires that 80% of the workers on a solar project be residents of the state of Ohio.
I love that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate it.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
I now would like to bring up Jim Erford, who's the Miller City Mayor, for opponent testimony. Is he around? Is he in the other room? Welcome. Yep, let's come on up here.
And Mr. Erfurt will testify after me, if that's good with you, sir.
I'm sorry.
My name's Jeff Rinkemeyer.
Oh, okay.
We're testifying as a group.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Now, what is your name?
Jeff Rinkemeyer.
Okay. You'll need to sign a witness slip.
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the House Public Utilities Committee, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Rinkemeyer. I'm a Director of Eastern Renewables Development for Avangrid Renewables, and I lead Avangrid Renewables project development efforts here in Ohio. Thanks for the opportunity to share Avangrid Renewables' position on House Bill 18. You guys heard a lot from developers. I'm a developer. I'm not going to retread that ground. I'm just going to try and be brief on mine and then turn this over to Jim and Jackie. A couple things I do want to discuss. First, before I start on testimony about the bill itself, I want to sincerely thank you, Chairman Hoops, for taking seriously the personal attack and doxing of an Avangrid Renewables employee during the proponent testimony a couple weeks ago. We did include a letter from our employee who wanted to address the committee, and I'd strongly urge the committee to read his letter. Second, I wanted to share that Avangrid is very concerned about this bill. Our project pipeline in Ohio currently includes 3 mature utility-scale solar projects in Putnam and Van Wert counties that we intend to build over the next 3 years. If all 3 are built, Avangrid Renewables will have invested almost $500 million, into Putnam and Van Wert County in rural Ohio. House Bill 118 threatens all 3 of these projects, including a very mature 46-megawatt solar project that's literally weeks away from finalizing its contract with the project's general contractor. Finally, I wanted to introduce 2 people, who I've gotten to know here through the Powell Creek siting and development process. Jim Erford, the mayor of Miller City, and Jackie Verhoff, the owner of Mac and Rita's restaurant in Miller City. We thought the best way to demonstrate our community impact is by talking about a project. Powell Creek is a project I'm particularly proud of. As part of the local outreach in the community, we are voluntarily participating as a stakeholder on another project that's going to have a positive impact in Miller City. I'll turn it over to Mayor Erford and Jackie to tell much more and tell you guys much better about what benefits of the Powell Creek project will be, noting that they have no personal financial interest in the project and know the area very well since they were both born in Miller City. And I'll turn it over to Jim.
Okay, thank you. And while they come up, I should have, Jackie, if I knew you were going to be here, we would have just had the meeting at Max and Irma. If you guys want to have a good hamburger or any type of meal, Max and Rita's is a good place to go. So if you're ever going through Miller City. So, Mayor?
Thank you. Chairman Hoops and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on House Bill 118. My name is Jim Erford. I was born and raised in Miller City, and I've been mayor since 2004. Miller City is a village in Putnam County, northwest Ohio. Population 140, and we're a tight-knit community and take care of each other, and I'm proud of my town. I am a strong supporter of Avangrid Renewables' proposed 150-megawatt solar farm near Miller City. I don't have any personal financial interest in the project, but my town will greatly benefit from the Powell Creek Solar Farm. Miller City and other local governments in the area have negotiated a 30-year pilot agreement for the project that will result in $26 million in revenue going to the county, 2 townships, 2 school districts, 2 emergency response agencies, several health and social services, and Miller City. By far, the biggest impact of the project, however, is that it will help Miller City build a new sanitary sewer. In fact, the sanitary sewer project is so important to our community that all project stakeholders, all entities involved in the pilot agreement, project landowners, and Avangrid, are pitching in a portion of their project revenue to help make it happen. The sanitary sewer is such a big deal because it has limited our town's growth for several decades and impacts our future as well. Because we don't have a sanitary sewer system, you cannot build a new home in Miller City unless you get a permit from the county to use an existing septic system or have an acre lot and follow the rules of the county for installing a system for a new home in the country. This issue impacts businesses as well. We have a convenience store in town that has a holding tank for its restrooms and has to have it pumped every month, and they've been doing this for 20 years. We have had requests to build request for a permit to install a car wash in town, but the county will not permit it without a sanitary sewer. Miller City got water in 2002, and since that time, we have been trying to get sanitary sewer. In 2012, with the help of RCAP, we hired an engineering firm to do a preliminary engineering to install a sanitary system and determine what the cost would be. They come up with a cost of nearly $200 per household per month for 30 years to pay off the debt, which is not acceptable. With the support of the Powell Creek Solar Project, our sanitary sewer will cost $60 per household per month, which is in line with other towns in the area charged for sewer service. I'm here today to ask for your support for the Powell Creek Solar Project and oppose House Bill 118, which threatens not just the solar project, but our entire town. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Jackie, would you like to, then we'll have time for questions. Welcome.
Thank you. Chairman Hoops and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to be here today to provide testimony on House Bill 118. My name is Jackie Verhoff. I was born and raised in Miller City and am the owner of Mac and Rita's. It's a restaurant and it has been in my family for 63 years, actually 64. But Miller City is a small town and we have less than 200 people. We have a church, a high school, there's 2 other food service places, and they all depend on each other. It makes Miller City a great place to live. Since we are a rural community and the closest town is 8 miles away, people are unlikely to just come to town for food. This means that activities at the church and the high school bring people to Miller City for ball games and whatnot, and they're critical to the survival of our town. If any of the services or businesses in Miller City fail, we all fail. As you may have heard, Miller City has needed a sanitary sewer system for over 20 years. We have tried several times to get the sewer system, but it has never worked out. Because Miller City doesn't have a sanitary sewer system, the town's growth has been limited. Worse than that is the fear that the high school might have to close at some point if we do not get the system. This would devastate Mac and Rita's as well as Miller City. Since Avangrid Renewables has proposed the building of the Powell Creek Solar Project near Miller City, I have the hope for the future of our town again. I am not getting any money from the project, but am thrilled with the local project benefits my community has negotiated with Avangrid. The pilot negotiated for the project includes $26 million over 30 years for local governments and money to help pay for sanitary sewer. What's even better is the sanitary sewer project is so important to our community that everyone is pitching in to make it happen. Village of Miller City, Liberty and Palmer Townships, project landowners, 2 school districts, Avangrid Renewables, and the county are all sharing a portion of the Powell Creek Solar Project revenue to help fund the sewer upgrade. It is truly a community project. Please support the Powell Creek Solar Project by opposing House Bill 118, which threatens the project. Thank you for your consideration.
Okay. Are there any questions? I guess I have one question for Mayor and for Jackie. You know, one of the concerns that we heard like last week was the communication between the company or people who came into the community and they kind of were surprised by things going on. Did you find that to be an issue or did they keep you in contact or informed on what was going on with this project?
Well, I thought we were pretty well informed.
They talk to property owners first, to find ground, but pretty early on, we were informed what was going on, and we had a lot of meetings and keep learning more all the time, and I'm real satisfied with the process that they did.
Okay, all right. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you for coming in today. Next, we have Betsy Engelking, VP of Policy and Strategy with the National Grid Renewables. Betsy, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Betsy Engelking. I guess it's afternoon now, isn't it? My name is Betsy Engelking. I am Vice President of Strategy and Policy for National Grid Renewables. We are a national wind and solar developer that is currently developing only solar in Ohio. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you in opposition of 118. I have filed written testimony. I'm not going to read it to you because certainly a lot of topics have been covered, and I do want to thank my USAC colleagues for their thorough and factual representation of what it's like to develop solar in general. And it's very similar to how it is to develop wind. I am going to touch on an issue that I don't think people have really talked to. People have spoken in opposition of the bill, as in, vote up, vote down. We know that doesn't always happen with bills. We know that bills sometimes need to be amended in order to address concerns that are coming up. And I want to talk about some of those possibilities. I think one of the possibilities you heard today was that solar doesn't need this particular bill to be applied to them. It's a much more local footprint than, I should say, a much smaller footprint than a wind farm. It's a much smaller view shed than a wind farm. There are fewer people who are potentially negatively impacted by the location of a solar project than possibly by a wind project that, in my experience, some of our projects have covered 70,000 acres and, are visible quite a ways beyond that. The second piece is that if we believe that we still need to go forward with a bill like this, there are some very severe problems with the timing of the referendum. Right now, what the bill says is once you've filed a petition with the Ohio Power Siting Board, within 30 days, the local government gets to decide either whether they will require a local referendum or they will allow people to petition for a local referendum. However, that local referendum does not take place until the first election, that is 90 days after the Ohio Power Siting Board issues its certificate. Now, you heard somebody say it could take 15 months to get a siting certificate. It took us on our, we recently received a certificate for our Yellow Bud project. It took us about 8 to 9 months in order to receive that permit. When developers start developing developing projects, they put money into those projects. And the farther it gets developed and the closer it gets to construction, they need to invest more and more money into these projects. Over the course of receiving a certificate, so you can imagine with all the studies that Mr. Wren listed out that we have to have at the Ohio Power Siting Board, you can imagine that we've already spent, sometimes $2 to $3 million just getting our site permit ready, doing all those studies, signing up landowners, paying them initial payments. Over the next, say, 15 to 24 months, while we're waiting for our certificate, we continue investing in that project. We have ongoing landowner payments. We have other studies that need to be done. We start engineering the electrical system. We start ordering solar panels and other items, inverters, that have long lead times that need to go on this site. So by the time we get to that 24 months, we have quite a big deal of money invested in this project. And if at that time we're subject to a referendum and the community says no, most of that is sunk costs. I mean, if we have deposits on panels, sometimes you can move panels to other projects. And so the real problem here is not that there's a referendum on the project and it's going to, stop this development at that point. The real problem is it's going to stop development completely, because there are no developers that are going to be able to put money into a project that is going to take, 24 months before we know if the community is going to accept it or not. No bank is going to finance a project if they think 24 months from now a community might say they will not accept that referendum, will not accept that project. And so this isn't going to result in great local input on projects. It's going to result in developers going elsewhere to develop projects. We've heard the Avangrid representative stating his $500 million in projects. National Grid Renewables has about $1 billion in investment that they're planning to make in Ohio. And they already have a customer, which is a very large corporation that employs many people in Ohio. We're not even able to tell you who it is yet because they don't want to have it announced until they know that the projects are going to happen. So again, there's customer uncertainty there. And what's really going to happen is all of these benefits, the saving of local towns, the saving of communities, the saving of rural school districts, all of those benefits that are going to come forward are going to go to Indiana, or they're going to go to Kentucky, or they're going to go east to Virginia, where they have a 100% renewable portfolio standard. Therefore, I urge you to rethink this bill in total. I urge you to rethink this bill with respect to solar development. And I urge you to rethink this bill with respect to a local referendum. If a local referendum is going to happen, it would need to happen at the beginning of the process and not at the end. Those are my comments. I'm open for any questions. I didn't describe my background. I have over 35 years in the electric industry. I have worked in regulation. I have worked for investor-owned utilities and rural electric co-ops. Now in renewable development, I have covered issues from utility rates to transmission to long-term power supply planning and acquisition, and I've seen this from all sides, and so I am happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, well, thank you. Are there any questions? You brought up some good points, though, that we need to look at in the process. So I want to thank you. Representative Ray.
Chairman, I just have one question for
Absolutely.
Betsy. And thank you so much. Your knowledge is very helpful as we sit and look at this issue. Do you have an approximate idea of what the average upfront cost before you even get to the siting board is?
Like I said, it can be $2 million to $3 million. I mean, some of the studies that we undergo, we have to hire a consultant. It costs upwards of $400,000 to $500,000 to have them go out and do these studies. And bring them back, on wetlands, on threatened and endangered species, on, other issues that we have to be concerned about. And so it's pretty typical by the time we reach construction that we have somewhere between $5 and $10 million invested in a project before we even get to the point where we're putting a shovel in the ground.
Okay. Representative Stein.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. If this process were to be moved earlier, because I understand completely the idea of the sunk costs involved to get to a point where we're going to now put this on the referendum after millions have been potentially invested in the process to determine the viability of a project. If we allowed, or if as a thought you allowed counties, townships, I'm not sure what the delineation of governmental entities should be, to at any point, not when there's a project in play, but we had wave a magic wand, we have a piece of legislation that says any county can deem they want to be a renewable energy zone that will allow solar only, or maybe solar and wind, or combination of either or, so that entities, companies know who's out there that's going to be that's in a favorable climate. Would that be helpful on the front end for the developers?
Mr. Chair, Representative Stein, something like that could be potentially helpful if we know on the front end. But I'd like to talk about some of the difficulties that happen with referenda. I think I heard somebody ask a question earlier about whether a developer could outspend local, local people in terms of opposition or support for a referendum. And one of the realities is it's not local people opposing those referenda. It is people who travel around the country and spread misinformation about wind and solar and are frequently backed by the oil, coal, and gas industries. And they are a formidable force in terms of coming into local communities, erecting billboards, putting on radio ads and newspaper ads, and whipping the community up into a frenzy over a project that they had maybe not even thought about in certain terms before. National Grid Renewables is, we consider ourselves a farmer-friendly company. It's kind of our tagline. We were, in fact, founded by a farmer who had a bad experience with a developer wanting to build wind on his land. And he formed the company and he built his own wind on his own land. And here we are 15 years later, and we're a nationally recognized wind and solar developer. We work very hard to get our communities on board with these projects. We don't just put a notice in a newspaper. We talk to people. We hold open houses. We have barbecue dinners where we invite the local community in so they can ask questions about the project. And we are no different than most of the developers in the business. There are developers that do have these issues. They are people who swoop in at night, drop a project down, and leave, and you never hear from them again. They are very few. And they are typically smaller. They're not national in scope. But local opposition, we find, it happens in pockets, and it happens with certain developers. And coming up with a bill that blankets the entire state with a requirement that could create difficulties for the industry and the benefits that they bring is not potentially the best solution for putting something forward in terms of controlling the development in the state. I would urge you to look at some of the things that have been talked about. For example, increasing the Ohio Public Siting Board's requirements on notice. We used to publish the notice in the newspaper and everybody gets a newspaper, right? And so everybody has the opportunity to see the notice. Who gets a newspaper now? What should we do? Should we send postcards to the people in the residence so they know that something is happening? Do you move to Facebook or Twitter or whatever other medium it is? But there are some things that can be done to get local involvement up early and to get people involved in those siting board processes that exist. And, as a company that has had states reject certain solar sites for, due to local opposition, I can tell you that it works. Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for your testimony today. Are you ready to take it over?
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give the gavel over to Vice Chair Ray. I have a committee I have to do some testimony real quick, but then I'll be back. So I leave it in good hands, and I'll be right back then for the rest of the testimony. Representative?
Thank you, Chairman. I think our next witness is Stephanie Cromer, Director of Energy and Environmental Policy of the Ohio Chamber. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. Chair Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the House Public Utilities Committee, my name is Stephanie Cromer, and I'm the Director of Energy and Environment at the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for allowing me to offer opponent testimony on House Bill 118. The Ohio Chamber is the state's leading business advocate, and we represent nearly 8,000 companies that do business here in Ohio. Our mission is to aggressively champion free enterprise, economic competitiveness, and the growth for the benefit of all Ohioans. Ohio is blessed to have an abundance of energy sources, from coal to natural gas to nuclear to wind to solar and more. Our energy sector consists of thousands of companies in these and related industries. We are home to the largest privately owned U.S. coal operator and the largest solar panel manufacturer in America. Ohio's shale industry is the fourth largest in the United States. Major oil and natural gas companies are headquartered in the state. Unfortunately, House Bill 118 creates new barriers to entry for solar and wind development by subjecting them to a new layer of local government regulation, in addition to the existing state process by including a township-by-township referendum. Further, House Bill 118 would apply retroactively to pending certificates and certificate amendment applications which were filed under a regulatory regime that did not contemplate a local vote. Many Ohio Chamber members, ranging from automobile and chemical manufacturers to steel producers and technology firms, have chosen to implement entirely voluntary renewable energy procurement goals. More choice in local energy procurement options and access to cost-competitive resources would provide these Ohio employers with flexibility to lower overhead energy costs and continue to positively contribute to Ohio's economic diversity and growth. When energy projects are sited in Ohio to meet Ohio companies' energy needs, there are multiple economic development benefits that flow to local communities often in need of new economic development activity. Energy generation resources directly inject significant tax revenue into local jurisdictions and schools without creating additional strain on local services. In this way, as Ohio companies increase their investment in local energy generation, they are also spurring new economic activity into Ohio's rural communities. That's why the Ohio Chamber has long been an advocate for an all-of-the-above approach to energy policy that doesn't hinder Ohio's ability to develop any of its many energy resources. This is important as Ohio's economy evolves. Our energy portfolio cannot remain static. Government regulation should not hinder energy innovation. The bill introduces tremendous new political risks to energy infrastructure projects that will deter investors and lenders from providing the upfront capital needed to build projects. Thus, the bill acts as an effective moratorium. As a result, House Bill 118, at a time when private sector demand for solar and wind energy continues to grow, government intervention into the marketplace would choke supply, raise prices, and hurt Ohio's business climate. No other sources of generation are subject to a similar public referendum. Such a requirement would almost kill every solar and wind project moving forward in the state and reverse the regulatory certainty developers and investors rely on to make business decisions and investments here in Ohio. Presently, there are numerous opportunities for residents and concerned citizens to have a voice in the power siting process. Before filing an application to build a new facility, a developer is required to hold a public informational hearing. The public is encouraged to submit informal, written comments to the Ohio Power Siting Board. Members of the public can provide sworn testimony at a formal public hearing conducted by the Ohio Power Siting Board. Individuals have the right to intervene in case proceedings, including the adjudicatory hearing, and may file for rehearing or appeal a board decision to the Ohio Supreme Court. As you can see, there is no shortage of opportunities. However, if you nonetheless believe these opportunities are insufficient A more balanced approach is needed than is proposed in House Bill 118. Last General Assembly, when I gave testimony on a similar bill that only subjected wind to township referenda, I warned the committee of the slippery slope that the bill presented when it comes to other sources of energy generation. Fast forward to today, House Bill 118 now includes solar, and we are seeing the beginning of the slippery slope in motion. This is not only concerning to wind and solar developers, but it is also a dangerous precedent for other energy infrastructure and agricultural projects. Proposals such as House Bill 118 do not create a friendlier business climate in Ohio. In fact, they do just the opposite. If passed, this bill could give solar and wind developers cold feet and prevent them from ever doing business here in Ohio, and depriving us of economic development opportunities that could generate millions of dollars of tax revenue, create both construction and long-term jobs, and contribute to diversifying our overall economy. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today, and I would be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Stephanie. You did
Thank
a
you.
lovely job. Does anyone have any questions? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Stephanie, for being here. Thank you for your work at the Ohio Chamber. I'm going to read part of your testimony back to you just for the benefit of those here. As a result, under House Bill 118, at a time when private sector demand for solar and wind energy continues to grow, government intervention in the marketplace would choke supply, raise prices, and hurt Ohio's business climate. You may have heard roughly 3.5 hours ago when I made reference to the CEO of PJM and and testimony he gave before the U.S. Senate 2 weeks ago, when he was looking at he compared the profile of new generation seeking to interconnect in the PJM grid, looking at 2015 and 2020, and the amount of innovation that renewables have seen and how that's affected private sector investment is just staggering. So in 2015, natural gas requested 58,000 megawatts. In 2020, they're down to 27,000. So they've cut their investment in half in the PJM grid. But storage had 0 megawatts in 2015. Storage now requesting 10,000 megawatts. Wind, 2,300 in 2015, now 6,500. So a threefold increase in solar, which went from 2,000 megawatts up to 58,000 megawatts. So, I mean, your warning and your testimony, plus the results of PJM, private investment trying to enter the market, is you're not just saying, hey, this is a yellow light on a traffic light. You're like, we're blowing through the red light, and we're blowing through a few of them. Because if 118 becomes law, this kind of investment that's currently going on in other states in PJM won't be coming to Ohio. So thank you for your testimony. I appreciate you being here for 4 hours in slightly less comfortable chairs than all of us are. To all of those who have yet to testify, we appreciate you being here. But would you like to comment on not just your warning, but the data shared by the PJM CEO in front of the U.S. Senate 2 weeks ago about where private investment is actually going?
Sure. Through the chair to the representative, I think contrary to popular belief, these decisions also are not being made in the boardrooms. A lot of the customers are demanding more renewables from these, manufacturers or wherever that may be. So, yes, I agree with your sentiments. The private sector is on their own making these decisions and these investments. Because it opens up the market a little bit, and it creates for more affordable and reliable energy here in this, in PJM. So I agree.
Thank you. Any further questions? I thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Our next witness is Michaela Piper, the Executive Director of the Paulding Chamber of Commerce. For just 1 minute, Representative Young, would you like to come up and sit up here with the rest of us? I see you back there kind of hiding in the corner. There are plenty of seats up here. Please join us. I feel like it's me driving people away. Michaela, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to offer opponent testimony on House Bill 118. My name is Michaela Piper, Executive Director of the Paulding Chamber of Commerce. The Paulding Chamber is dedicated to the economic health and vitality of Paulding County and the entire Northwest Ohio region. We're committed to working with the business community, educators, and government to establish the best possible business environment. As you may know, Paulding County has experienced, like no other county in the state, the tremendous benefits of wind development. The pilot payments are the #1 tax revenue resource in Paulding County, providing an impressive new revenue for our schools, new income for area landowners, and new revenues for local businesses who supply goods and services to the renewable energy companies. In addition, wind energy has brought hundreds of new temporary jobs during the construction phase, as well as permanent jobs with highly paid, highly trained staff. Because of these benefits, clean energy development has been the #1 opportunity for economic growth in Paulding County. You may wonder why the idea of a local vote would concern me, and we're preparing right now to welcome solar development to Paulding County. We're not done growing and encouraging clean energy investment in our county, and we're not done investing in our children and building opportunities for our farmers to earn new income. If you'll notice in my testimony, I attached a summary of the total pilot revenue collected and projected for 2019 through 2021, as well as projected pilot revenues for the new solar project. This is our opportunity to secure a recession-proof, resilient economy for years to come. Singling out our renewable energy development with House Bill 118 imposes burdensome new red tape and will create a chilling effect on solar and wind investment that would likely be a roadblock, especially when other energy generation resources do not face the same obstacles. As Sarah E. Hunt, CEO of Joseph Rainey Center for Public Policy, shared about other similar legislative attempts, what smart, innovative company will attempt to build new electricity infrastructure in Ohio only to face a fatal referendum after millions have already been spent? Join me in opposing House Bill 118, and let's not surrender the opportunity to grow our economy and welcome thousands of new jobs to our state. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Michaela? No? You are released.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in today. Next, we have Alex Fisher, President and CEO of Columbus Partnership. Oh, he had to leave? Okay. Let me mark him down as gone. Do we have Nathan Strum, Executive Director of Grow Licking County? Oh, Mr. Strum, welcome. Floor
Good
is yours,
afternoon.
sir.
Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, who's hiding from me now, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today in opposition of House Bill 118. My name is Nate Strum, and I serve as Executive Director for Grow Licking County, a 501c3 nonprofit here in Licking County, Ohio, that serves as the front door for our community for economic development purposes. Economic development organizations are at the forefront of advocating for the growth of our communities. And in today's climate, we recognize the energy is an increasing and important issue for business attraction and retention. In recent years, portions of Ohio has experienced substantial investment growth in the renewable energy sector, most notably Northwest Ohio. This activity has fueled economic growth in my community and others, as many corporations in the logistics, data, and manufacturing sectors look towards including robust renewable energy goals to offset their energy costs, as well as means to promote their own corporate culture. In recent years, renewable energy opportunities have assisted Licking County and many of my contemporaries to attract substantial investments in job creation centers, including Amazon, Google, and Facebook to Central Ohio. Moreover, according to the U.S. EPA, of the largest consumers of the green energy, the top 50 reads like a who's who of Ohio enterprises and employers, including those previously noted, as well as Owens Corning at number 11, P&G at number 13, the Boeing Company at number 19, Lockheed Martin at 23, JP Morgan Chase at 29, Fifth Third Bank at 35, Kohl's Department Store at 41, and Whirlpool Corporation falling just outside the top 50 at number 51. Now, my community is looking at multiple large-scale solar-focused renewable energy projects that could serve as transformative opportunities for the townships, schools, and other taxing authorities that could reap the benefits of this type of project with minimal negative impacts to local infrastructure and institutions. That is why I encourage you to oppose House Bill 118, a troubling proposal that would take away landowners' rights by subjecting renewable energy development to local referenda and insert a level of unprecedented variability into an already aggressive site selection or elimination process that could negate this type of project, but also could dissuade renewable energy users from investing in Ohio. Economic development officials are on the front lines working to expand Ohio's economy and through attracting new opportunities, as well as retaining and expanding existing corporations. As many of our competing states and communities move to expand access to clean energy to promote growth, how can Ohio explore undercutting it? I implore the committee to promote the development of clean energy investment in Ohio and aid in the continued economic recovery within many of our communities. For these reasons, I ask that you oppose House Bill 118. Thank you for the opportunity this afternoon, which was started as this morning, and I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much for hanging in there. Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Strong? Thank you very much for coming in
Thank you very much
today,
for your
sir.
time.
Okay, next on our list, we have Carolyn, is it Gibbo? Gibbo. Welcome.
Vice Chair Ray, I think he's left, but members of the Public Utilities Committee. My name is Carolyn Jabot, and I appreciate the opportunity to voice my opposition to House Bill 118 for its impact on landowners. Today, I speak on behalf of my parents, Roy and Wilda Steyer, and my entire family, as landowners in Liberty Township, Union County, near Raymond. My parents bought and worked on their farm for over 62 years, only leaving because of declining health, with my father passing away shortly thereafter, about 5 years ago. At that time, we retained the farmland as an income source for my mother, who is now 96 years old. In 2018, a project developer approached our family with an offer to lease our land for a solar farm project. We were not coerced, we were not pressured, we were not bullied. As a family, we discussed the pros and the cons of participating in such a long-term project. As a responsible landowner and a neighbor, we did consider in our lease the very issues that worry the community: screenings for neighboring homes, drainage impacts, noise and water pollution, and finally, the land reclamation at the project's end. We viewed this as an opportunity to keep our farm for generations, not just a few years. We worked to ensure that our 4- and 6-year-old family members will not be left with a mess when they, as young men, will be overseeing the land's reclamation in decades to come. In reaching a decision, we tried to think what my late father's comments would be on this opportunity. The word progress immediately came to mind. He would see this project as a sign of progress and of the future. He would say that we live in a time where more and more industries and people are looking to use renewable energies, and now we could be part of meeting that need. He would look at the stability that fixed payments would give to our family's income, rather than be dependent on the weather, government policy, trade policy, seed, chemical, fertilizer prices, and volatile commodity prices. He would also point out, probably quite colorfully, whose name is on the deed and who's been paying taxes all these years, earning our family the right to do what we think is best. So after much deliberation and research, along with much guidance from an experienced attorney, we moved forward with leasing arrangements, and we began looking forward to the project's progress. Now, we are facing the impact of your bill. Frankly, I find it infuriating that many of the opponents of these solar projects are those who've moved out into the country recently and now want to control what opportunities the longtime landowners can or cannot select. Most of the families that are participating in our solar project have also worked their land for generations and have determined the best use of their land. These energy projects will allow many families to continue farming operations during the very bad years, reduce the need for borrowing capital to get a crop in the ground, and provide incentives to keep the land together rather than chopping it up into housing and selling it to the highest bidder. Ironically, many of the people who are now crying out the loudest now live on housing plots that not very long ago were part of farms. Were these people here in the 1950s when my parents literally tracked every nickel so they could meet their mortgage payment? Probably not. Did they watch them milk cows for 32 years, night and morning? Probably not. Did they have to rebuild buildings when a tornado blew through? Probably not. The design of this bill could result in the community holding up projects that were entered into in good faith between the landowner and the project developer. If I felt that a referendum would present facts, not just fears, not just internet social media hype, I would be less fearful. However, having watched the reactions from those attending the same information meeting that I did, and seeing how twisted some reactions were, I have grave doubts for a fair discussion of facts. The Ohio government has already created the Ohio Power Siting Board that, as we've heard, has the oversight and addresses the issues that communities have over these projects. The OPSB has requirements for extensive testing. We've heard about that. The documentation for the maintenance, operation, and reclamation. The Ohio Power Siting Board already has responsibility to make sure these projects do not negatively affect the land, water, wildlife, and people in the community. They offer the opportunity for community posting and testimony. We've heard that today. If there are real issues with these solar or wind projects that the OPSB is not addressing, then fix the board process. Do not put forward this legislation that sounds to me like socialism, where the means of production and distribution and land use is regulated by the community as a whole. This legislation is a slippery slope to take away farmers' and landowners' rights to use their property as they see best. And to have an election will only bring more conflict with neighbor against neighbor. That's an important reason to fix any real issues at the OPSB instead of trying to use referendums. Ohio also wants to be a leader in bringing new and better jobs to our state, and hamstringing these energy projects will only lead Ohio to fall further behind in sourcing the alternative energy that future job-producing industries are demanding. This bill is not beneficial for the environment, for the employment, for the economies of our rural communities. I implore you to not rip the right to decide from the landowners. They have taken the time to review and welcome this opportunity to better their legacy, to better their community through the increased revenues for the county, townships, schools, and libraries, and to be a contributor in the renewable energy. Please do not support the continuation of this bill. I thank you for your time and consideration. And at this time, I would also like to present 56 letters or messages from fellow residents who also oppose this bill, and I would request that their messages be entered into the record, if so please the chair and the committee.
Yes.
And they reference both this bill and the sister bill in the
Okay.
Senate.
All right. Thank you.
Again, I thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Okay. Are there any questions? I had to get back quick. She does such a great job. I might lose my job, so I had to hurry up. So
She had an eye on that
thank you
chair.
for taking it. So
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there
Thank
any
you very much.
questions for the For the witness? Okay, thank you, and thank you for the letters, too. What we'll do is we'll scan them in, and they'll be on the website for people to look at.
I appreciate
Yep, thanks. Okay, the next person to testify is Jane Sweet, fourth-generation farm owner and farm manager. Welcome. From Greene County, right?
Greene County.
Okay. Welcome.
Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and committee members, I appreciate, oops, I'm taking this off. I've had my second shot.
Sure.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and provide testimony on House Bill 118. I'm a fourth-generation farm owner in Greene County. In fact, my great-grandfather bought the first land, 81 acres, in 1874. Agriculture faces challenges including unpredictable weather, rising production costs, and decreasing profit margins. Farming practices continually change to keep up with what we grow. Industrial agriculture requires large, expensive machinery that keeps us in debt. Jobs that existed a decade ago have changed or disappeared or are not coming back. Our industry will look vastly different 30 years from now. We need to think differently, adapting to the innovation that feeds our economy. My family committed part of our land to the Kingwood Solar Clean Energy project. This was a family decision. We believe solar is a crop of the future and one of the many paths of diversification. And Ohio State University Extension research shows the steady decline of Western Ohio cropland and cash rent values. Solar farms on privately owned land is one way to preserve our farms, maintain production, and increase value for future generations. The sustainable practice of allowing the land to lie fallow, resting, regenerates the soil, and this will happen underneath solar panels. Rainwater runoff will filter into our aquifer with reduced amounts of fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides, all goals of the H2 Ohio Water Initiative. Solar project participants retain ownership of their land. The solar array infrastructure can be removed and recycled, returning land to agricultural production in the future. The solar lease company is committed to restoring the land at the end of the project, and we believe this project is preferable to selling our land for permanent, non-agricultural use. Septic systems and concrete parking lots are not easily recycled. Solar power is low-lying and emission-free. Once construction is completed, it makes a nice, quiet neighbor. Now, I know community members voice concerns, and I want to address this from my perspective. Since 2001, in the 3 townships surrounding the proposed Kingwood Solar Project, a large number of farm acres have changed hands. Many houses now stand where crops once grew. Farm families, for death and taxes, farm families sold off building lots, entire farms or farm parcels through auction, land developers, or private sale. Except for bidding on an auction, I have not had any say or any right to decide in the ultimate use of my neighbors' lands. I trusted that they would develop their land in a way that was right for their family and our community. I'm not against houses. I live in one. My concern is that the one commercial use of farmland that adds the most value to the local economy may be subject to a referendum. Imagine a referendum for a safe, clean solar energy project that is not required in any other industry in Ohio. And that means fracking. The solar company has hosted community meetings, has a website, Facebook page, and has made their team available to our community. We will be doing screening, plant pollinator habitats, and other features that go above and beyond industry standards. We can't hide the project, but it is not a block of unsightly panels. It curves along farm roads and through the woods, and alongside some houses and cropland, including my own. It would serve as a science project to schools to demonstrate how technology and nature can work together in harmony. The Kingwood Solar Project will add $1.5 million to our local schools and governments annually, benefiting local families, local schools, townships, and Greene County. It will provide a stable source of revenue for years to come by creating 300 construction jobs and training, plus other long-term employment opportunities. The next generation of farmers should have opportunities, not obstacles. It is our hope that our community will recognize the value of this solar project by welcoming the participation of new clean energy production for current and future generations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions for the thing? Okay, you bring up some very good points. Thank you. I want to invite Alex Fisher. Is Alex? Yep, there he is. Hi, Alex. President and CEO of the Columbus Partnership. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Hoops and Vice Chair Ray and Ranking Member Smith. It's great to be with you all. Appreciate accommodations of schedule. I've found this morning's discussion with Awesome very enlightening, and it's exciting for me to see the work that is going on in the committee and the depth that you're going into these energy policies. And I wasn't going to mention this, but I'm also really glad that I've heard the last couple of pieces of the testimony. I took a weekend trip to Tennessee, where I'm from, and my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my mother all grew up on a Tennessee Century farm. It was a tobacco farm. I'm the first person of the family not to have grown up on it. I spent a lot of time there on weekends. That was the cash crop back in the day, and not so much today. And many of the same debates of those properties are occurring, and how the families can retain them and continue to have them in productive uses when the agricultural environment has changed. I think those are way more powerful words coming from lifelong generations of Ohioans who are impacted by this legislation. It's one of the reasons I stand in opposition. I'll give you a few other business perspectives as well. The Columbus Partnership represents 11 counties in Central Ohio. Many people think of us as the big urban city of Columbus Partnership, but indeed we represent the rural and agricultural areas of Central Ohio as vigorously as we do the urban setting, and I think this legislation is harmful to both. It's pretty rare for me personally to come across the street and stand and testify. That's how passionately we feel about this legislation. I wanted to personally be here to voice our opposition in the strongest possible way, because we think this legislation, in addition to the other things you've heard today, is damaging to economic development, to job creation, to capital investment, to the pro-business environment of Ohio. You'll always hear me talking about consistency and predictability of doing business in Ohio. That includes the regulatory environment. It includes the predictability and consistency of electric and power and utility pricing that is always important. I believe this would take us backwards and not forward in the state of Ohio. Just in our 11-county region today, and it will be different 6 months from now, we have 15 companies that are considering investing in our region, over $14 billion at stake, creating over 20,000 jobs. Those are the number of projects that we have in our pipeline that are telling us that they prefer and/or require renewable energy for their project to move forward in the state of Ohio. This is no longer a passing fad as it might have been a decade ago related to renewable energies. This is the absolute requirement of projects big, and we often think about the mega projects, and projects that are small. And we continue to see the trend. In fact, at the partnership, we created an energy aggregation program to just last year, at the end of last year, to begin to say, can we bundle renewable energy because we're seeing such a demand of people like Cardinal Health and Huntington and Abercrombie, companies that are like Denison University and the Ohio State University, where I'm a trustee, all moving towards renewable energy technology. We know over 100,000, nearly 120,000 residents are employed at 155 renewable energy facilities around the state. The auto industry, so go out to Marysville and look at the dominance that was created when Governor Rhodes had a vision and built a beltway that people probably laughed at, and built a testing facility. And look at the auto industry that has grown up in central Ohio and all over the state. They're some of the largest requirers now of renewable energy. And in fact, they're taking their entire fleets to be electric fleets. And they look and they watch at the states that are putting forward good policy and or bad policy as it relates to the future. It's all about consistency and predictability. What will Ohio be known for? What will we stand for? Right now, we stand as a great place to do business, a place that doesn't over-regulate, that doesn't put cumbersome burdens on business and industry, and reacts to the things that business and industry are providing. You have a copy of my written testimony, which is a little bit more formal. I wanted to come and just make a few of these points. Appreciate the diligence by which you're taking up, and Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions of the committee.
All right, thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Representative Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony today. As somebody whose mother's family is from Coffee County, Tennessee,
Oh, yeah.
I recognize that as a
That accent,
middle Tennessee accent.
Middle Tennessee accent.
Okay,
indeed.
all right, thank you.
I'm from south of here, just a little further.
Okay, all right, fair. We can talk about that later. But anyway, what I would like to get your thoughts on, if we can, because we are seeing with this bill and a few of the other bills here in the State House, kind of this convergence of, and you mentioned, how do states handle these policies? Is the convergence of local government versus local landowner versus state policy. There's 3 or 4 levels, plus what are the business community outside of our state, what do they see going on there? And I guess my question is how do we get to that balance of predictability and stability as communities or people in the community see this change, as some would see it as great, some would see it as not so much. But how do we keep that stability and predictability for businesses, but at the same time balancing what, I've heard some people say this is a home rule or a local control issue, and then you have others who say it's private property. If that makes sense, if I could just, right. You could kind of expand on that, please.
No,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I think it's, the kind of the crux of what's happening and what I've been watching certainly over the last 5 years, the intensity by which these issues are moving and shifting in states everywhere. And we see it here, right? And we see the, energy policy debates and where we're going. And I do think that this can be an issue of property rights versus home rule, and I understand those issues, very well. But when I look at, from my standpoint, these are the issues that are best left and dealt with from a statewide policy standpoint. Local governments and candidly even property owners don't have the ability to have the depth and the expertise. I think the people, certainly who came and testified today have spent time on it and understand it very, very well, but not everybody has that ability and that time to do that. I think it's left to the complex debate that you all were having this morning for state policymakers to set those policies. I worry about the politics of referendums. We understand the challenges and the problems that can come with that. I worry about the abuse that can come with the politics of referendum and oftentimes at the local level. So on complex energy policy level, what we find from a company's standpoints is they look to state governments to set that policy. And they worry about then multiple jurisdictions that don't have the time and the expertise to go deep on these topics. So I would encourage, so an example would be the Power Siting Board, and it was referenced, if there are issues around siting, those should be issues that get adjudicated, in my opinion, at the state level, not at the local level. So that you've got the level of expertise and experience that is being brought to the table. I think that companies respect that, they understand that. And so between the Public Utilities Commission, the Power Siting Board, the legislative bodies, companies look for that statewide expertise in setting a policy. In something like this, they get very nervous about the unpredictability and the inconsistency that can come by driving it too far to the local level. And I respect and understand the issues of local control and home rule. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your answer.
Representative Stein.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. So, we're here today because local constituents of many of ours have concerns over the process, as you've stated. And certainly one of those options would be to try to look at the Ohio Power Siting Board and look at ways to address what they perceive are those deficiencies in process in terms of their voices being heard and their access to that process. And I think most would agree that there are certainly differences between from what we've heard today, which has almost been, unless there was some while we were out of the room, geared towards solar projects, not towards wind development, that those are two different distinct generational sources with a whole set of different aesthetics and issues related to them. What's your thought on how we allow local residents, via not a referendum, to have that voice, that they are being heard and that they have some seat at the table that they currently, quite frankly, don't believe is the case, or we wouldn't be having conversations about House Bill 118.
Right. Mr. Chairman, Representative, so, I think that probably is, again, at the crux of, these debates. And I think then the question is how the legislative body, along with the other regulatory statewide bodies, take an ear towards listening and understanding those local concerns and the different sides of those issues and the differences of issues that come up between different types of projects. And so, again, my response is you listen, you engage, you as a representatives bring those voices back, and you shape statewide policy based on the totality of all the voices on both sides of the equation. But you don't delegate and relegate it to, something that, just personally, when it's that complex to a topic of referendum and a topic of local decision-making. I think you can get local inputs. I think that's what you as members are doing here, and you can shape policy by listening and responding. It doesn't mean that you have to delegate and relegate it to the local level.
Okay. Well, we thank you for your testimony today, and thank you
Indeed.
for coming
Thank
in.
you all. Appreciate your service.
I'd now like to welcome Michael and Annette Hawk. Okay. Welcome from Highland County. Yep. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Representative Hoops, Vice Chair Ray. and the rest of the representatives here today. My name's Annette Hauk, and my husband, Mike, is here with me today. And we're here to oppose House Bill 118. We are landowners in Highland County, and we have both been farmers all of our lives. We're one of the young ones. First off, I'd like to thank you for your public service that you give and a balanced approach to Ohio. And I'm here because my concern is that House Bill 118 is going to allow other people in my township, other people that are not landowners, to make decisions about my property. And when I say my husband and my property. I'm very, very passionate about this House bill. To my knowledge, no other state allows other people to tell landowners what they can and can't do with their land. I'd like to tell you a little bit about me and Mike. I'm the second to the youngest of 12 children. I grew up in Adams County with a hoe in my hand, tobacco. My father was known as the hay man because he loaded a semi with hay every week and sold one bale at a time. 12 years of marriage, 12 children and 38 years of marriage, and my mom and dad got divorced. Sold our farm. That was a hard day. That was from stress, anger pent up, and the hardships of what farmers face. 5 of us 12 children went to college. I was one of those fortunate ones. Since I grew up in a trade business, that's what I learned to do. But there's a soft side to me, and I was kind of artistic. I went to the Art Academy of Cincinnati, became a graphic designer. And there's really not a lot of use for graphic designers in the country. And I couldn't get the dirt out from under my toes. So I had to be self-employed and have been for 29 years in Wilmington. I'm going off my script. You have my testimony. But after hearing everybody else say the same thing that was in my script, I want you to get to know who I am and why I really, really need to oppose this House Bill 118. Mike helped me start my business. Mike's story is similar to mine, except that his dad died when he was 50, and his mom had to sell their farm in order for her to continue to pay for herself and make ends meet. Mike and his 2 brothers had to go away from the farm. One went and worked at a hospital, one went to UPS and became a UPS driver. And Mike, He was a press operator. That's how the two of us kind of got together. My graphics, his printing. Together, we decided we were both in debt. Can't get much worse. Let's work together, buy some property. And we did 26 years ago, our first parcel. That was kind of easy. A little scary. We worked really hard to pay for it. Bought a second one. Not big. And then a third. All total, we have 258 acres. We were doing pretty good, or so I thought. Until about 13 years ago, things got really tight. And we had to ask the USDA to help us out. We ended up getting help about a year and a half later. We ended up with a government loan when all the other farmers were still struggling as well, paying 7, 8, 9% interest on their commercial loans. We quietly settled into our 3 3/4 interest loan. We didn't really talk about it because there's a certain amount of shame with that, having to say we ran into trouble. And that's why this bill is so upsetting for me. If I stand before you and say, when Mike was out running the beans and the combine broke down, how could I say, well, we're just not going to harvest? We took the combine. 3 days later, I'm stressing because the beans need out. And the machinery shop, don't want to mention names, said it's going to cost you $16,000. Well, our line of credit was already maxed out because we had seed costs, fertilizer costs, everything else. We just were waiting for our harvest to pay back our debt because when you're beginning farmers, you don't have much cash flow. Your balance sheet is here. Your financial statement's here. On your financial statement, you have your land. You have your long-term assets. Over here, your banks look at your income statement. This is why we had to get a government loan, because our cash flow wasn't very good, because we have such high input costs. So, my banker says, why do you do it? We do it because of what I said over here. The financial statement, we were making our land payments with that lower interest loan. We weren't making anything else. This land that we bought for $2,000 last week in Highland County sold for $9,588 from a fellow friend farmer who said, I give up, can't do this anymore. He sold his 231 acres. And one parcel only sold for over $5,000. All told, he got $1,760,000. And I said, Mike, if we was to sell now, pay off what's still left on our encumbrance, even at $10,000 an acre, we can't live the rest of our lives for $1.7 million. What I'm trying to say is our land is our life savings. It's our nest egg. It's the only thing we've got because we've done nothing but work. Now, I'm not complaining. I'm not crying about it. and I'm not asking for a pity party. What I'm asking you to do is understand why this bill hits me so hard. It hits me hard because it's an infringement on my rights as a landowner. It lets you let my neighbors tell me what to do when I'm still living in a house trailer. I have 12 siblings. Let me tell you, I've never once invited them to my trailer because it's not exactly big enough for a big family function. So, when Interjex Renewable reached out to us, we said, well, let us think about this. Because when we went through our government loan process, I learned a lot. I learned exactly what I didn't know, and I learned exactly what I needed to know. And the biggest thing was, if I'm not earning it, I need to be learning it. And what I learned is I need to know exactly what I have in front of me. I need to know exactly where I plan to be tomorrow. And I need to have long-term goals. And if I stay focused, I'm going to get there. And all day today, that's all I heard from everybody that presented to you. What is the best thing for Ohio? And I just don't see why clean energy isn't good for Ohio. I don't understand why you're taking my right to use my land and make decisions for it. And a referendum that is being put on it could mean that if we need to erect a large grain bin, my neighbor might say, but it's casting a shadow across my swimming pool and we can't get the sun rays to get our tans. I have a real problem with that because my grain bin may not be as tall, Mr. Stein, as your windmill turbines. But someone might say, hey, landowner farmer, we don't want you to erect that grain bin over here. Furthermore, we don't want you parking those tractors over there where our kids might get on them. We have zoning. So right now, we can put up a grain bin. We can control some of our marketing costs on our commodities. But with Interjex, we can also produce clean energy. We're still farmers. It would only be part of our land, but it would take away some of our stress of not knowing if we're going to have a profit this year or a loss. On that line of credit that I'm using every year because I don't own my land, a previous landowner said, my dad just died, he was 96. That's not the case for Mike and I. We're new farmers. You know how many federal programs there are for new farmers? There's quite a few. But Mike and I, we don't qualify as new farmers because I'm 56. He turned 63 yesterday. We fit in that wedge between new farmers and old farmers that have been passing their land down for generations. Both of us, we lost our farms. We didn't get our mom and dad's properties. My inheritance was $2,000 when both my parents died. That's all. You divide it 12 ways. I didn't expect anything. I didn't ask for anything. But I am asking today. Please don't take away my landowner rights. Please don't put a referendum on something that's going to chain my hands, make me go back to my USDA government loan and say, whoops, I'm going to default on that. I'm not. My books are in good order. I'm grateful. We've been blessed. If this project doesn't happen, we're still going to be okay. But I wanted you to know how difficult the road has been for us. Farming is hard. Only 2% of us are feeding the entire country. Less than 2%. And the last count I had, Vilsack said 1%. But I don't have current data on that. So I'm going to say less than 2%. That makes us efficient. Very efficient. Which goes back to play in why, if I own the land and I'm an efficient farmer and 2% of us are feeding everybody plus other countries, why would you then not allow me to make my decision and give that to somebody that came out to the country, bought 5 acres, it's called urban sprawl, and twice in the last 5 years, I've nearly been run over on the highway. Mike now has to ask his brother to haul our grain down the road because I refuse to drive on the highway. Urban sprawl has caused all these wonderful people from the city to come out to our beautiful country, build their houses. They're beautiful, mind you. I have no problem with their homes. But they all want to run back to the city and they're always in a hurry. I'm throwing the tractor into 5th gear. I'm going as fast as I can. I'm standing up in the seat. I'm turning. Okay? I got a tool on the back of me, an implement, whether it be a hay cart with 10 large round bales of hay, SMV sign on the back, and I have to swing out. There's just no other way around it. Twice this has happened. I swing out. Here comes the car. Passing me on the inside. There's no lane there. That's what urban sprawl has done to me.
Let me ask you a question in your testimony. You mentioned that you have a loan with the federal government. Does that affect the contract that you would sign with the solar company because of having a loan? Does that play into that at all?
Excuse me. My bank is aware of what I'm doing.
Okay.
They want to see what I'm doing. Our USDA loan is based on farming proceeds to comply with that government loan.
Okay.
Okay? The property that we would use is only part of our property, so we would still be in compliance with our loan.
Okay. You brought that, that made me think about that. I want, if people, because I know farming is very challenging.
That was
Yeah,
a concern
okay.
for me. That was a concern for me. A second concern for me, when Interjex approached us, and we did do our homework, when Michael Volpe was here, he gave meetings in our county. I went to those. Even though I'm with Interjex, he was with a different solar program. But it was in the papers. It was on the radio.
So you confirm what he did, what he said they're doing,
Everything he
Okay.
said he did
All right.
do, because I attended the meetings back at my office. I
Okay.
have his business card, because I was like, Mike, that's the Mike that was at the Southern State Community College.
Okay.
One other
All
thing I
right.
want to add is that our area, Wilmington, Clinton County, Highland County, was home to Airborne Express. 2005, they sold out to DHL. When they did that, DHL stayed for a period of time. And then I don't really know the details of why they pulled out. But when they did, there was about 12,000 jobs that were lost. And when that happened, every farmer I knew lost his health insurance benefits because every farmer I knew worked there at night. If he didn't, his wife did, to bring home the health insurance. Now, we've had the pandemic over the past year, and I just want to share with you that my daughter is a school bus driver. Finally, we formed a hybrid, and children started going back to school part of the days. Part of the days they stayed home and remotely learned. And then finally we went back to school, and then, you know, weather's strange. We got 12 inches of snow all at one time.
Well,
Missed
let's, I think, we have other people testifying, so I'd like to just, that I appreciate what you've said, because I know it comes from the heart, and I think that's what we've seen here today. And I think that the one thing I've learned is there is communication going on. Now, 2 weeks
Absolutely.
ago, they said there wasn't, so we're going to have to work through that. But I appreciate you being here today. And I hate to cut you off, but I know there's others that want to testify, and they need to get home too. And I guess, does anybody have any questions for that? Okay. Well, thank you for coming in today. And we can talk afterwards if you need to share anything else, but I want to get the other witnesses here too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Sarah Knudsen, landowner from Greene County. I'm sometimes not sure if it's a silent K or not.
Yeah, I get that all the time. It's not a silent K, so it's Knudsen.
Knudsen, oh, Knudsen. How do you get an E out of a
Yes.
U? Knudsen.
Danish descent.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you for being here.
Great, thank you. Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to provide my testimony on House Bill 118. My name is Sarah Knudsen, and I am a fifth-generation owner of a Greene County farm. You heard my mother earlier today. Spending time on my grandparents' farm in Greene County was a favorite memory of growing up. I got to do gardening, yard care, drive the tractor. My grandparents taught me great stewardship of the land, hoping that I would be the next farmer. 2 years ago, my husband and I bought the home my grandparents built for their retirement on the farm. Now our children can share my childhood memory of the farm and the surrounding area. We support our family's commitment to the Kingwood Solar Project. As we explore the county, if you drive through Greene County, you'll see these signs that are very disturbing to us. It says, "Save our farmland, stop industrial solar." The truth is, this project can help save farmland. The Kingwood Solar Project is not on community property. We, the farmers, as mentioned previously, will retain ownership of the land. We, farming community, believe in this clean energy. We believe in building up the soil and returning the benefits to the community, committing to a high-tech crop. We know that Governor DeWine has earmarked federal funds to Ohio for broadband development in rural areas. Broadband will require a consistent stream of high-tech energy, which we know we can do with solar. Other sources of energy create significant problems in communities all over Ohio. Fracking producing 3,400 billion liters of wastewater each year in the U.S. and releases harmful methane gases into the air. Last year, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources said that fracking waste from an injection well had migrated to another well 5 miles away. And just last month, the ODNR confirmed that an oil and gas well spilled thousands of gallons of fracking waste, impacting a nearby tributary and killing fish. All energy has its issues, but solar is by far the cleanest and most abundant energy resource. The group opposing the project has been active for 2 years, and our project hasn't even filed with the Ohio Power Siting Board. So the argument that there has been no community input is completely unfounded, as you've heard earlier today. The Kingwood Organization Company has had one-on-one conversations, community meetings, even outside of what they have to do by law. They have a website, Facebook page with maps and FAQs. We are an open book. Information available on the Kingwood website shows that approximately 50% of the land remains uncovered by panels, and there are no permanent foundations with the solar array area. Drainage is maintained or redesigned. There is little grading or soil compaction, and the topsoil stays on site. Temporary removal of the project lands from agricultural production will allow for improved soil health throughout the life of the solar project. We, as a family, are proud to be able to add value to the community, even more than what our farm can do today. Clean energy generation, $1.5 million annually to our local schools in Greene County Township. That is $45 million over the life of this project. Kingwood Solar will be one of the largest revenue generators in the county. So, members of this committee, here is our opportunity as private landowners to do what is right for our environment, to give back to the community in jobs and taxes, to diversify our Ohio energy sources, and for us as a family to honor our ancestors who fought to keep this land during the Great Depression, during droughts, during floods, during windstorms that devastated crops days before harvest. So let us have the opportunity to do what's right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. So you feel they've done a good job of communicating to you and whoever's involved, from what I hear?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I just got a letter in the mail this week from the lawyer, and there is a community Facebook meeting taking place on March 30th.
Okay.
My mother has drawerfuls of information in her filing cabinet as well, so I've seen it firsthand.
Okay, well, I like what you said. You have favorite memories of growing up on your grandparents' farm, because I do too. I learned how to drive a tractor, and I learned that you had to put the brake on and the clutch, because if it's only the brake, I ran into a garage and almost knocked it over.
Oh, yeah.
Luckily, my grandfather was in
tricky.
a good mood that day, so, but thank you for
Well, good
being
to
here.
hear. Thank you.
That was interesting. Okay. Tony, I will just go on here. Tony Logan.
Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, and Ranking Member Smith, I thank you for the opportunity to offer some opposition testimony to House Bill 118. Once again, I'm Tony Logan, and I'm here because I farm with my brothers on a sixth-generation grain and grass-fed beef farm up in Trumbull County, northeastern Ohio. I'm also an attorney who has practiced over 30 years in ag law and natural resource law, both in government service and in private practice. And most recently, I served as USDA's Ohio Rural Development Director for the state of Ohio. I'm also a member of the Ohio Farm Bureau and the Ohio Farmers Union. In addition to the numerous public policy reasons for opposing this bill, which have been or will be covered by other opponents, I'd like to touch on a formidable legal obstacle that I consider to be extraordinary government overreach. At its core, this legislation represents a governmental seizure of private property rights without compensation, I believe in violation of the Ohio and U.S. constitutions. And of course, the basis for that is our founding fathers, our founding persons, and their respect for personal liberty and the right to peacefully enjoy private property. The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution and Article 1, Section 19 of the Ohio Constitution states that private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. And while the township referendum scheme set out in 118 admittedly is not a straightforward condemnation action, the effect on the landowner's ability to develop his or her land for its highest and best use as a renewable energy project is real and permanent and financially destructive to those farmers and landowners. And under the doctrine of inverse condemnation, which has been adopted by Ohio courts, the property owners themselves can initiate an eminent domain action against government authorities for a taking of their property rights. And in that action, the public use that's alleged can be something much less than they took it for a roadway or took it for a school. For example, Ohio courts have required compensation for state action that periodically flooded farmers' lands, like the Grand Lake St. Mary's cases of a decade ago, or at the federal level for the denial of a right to develop real estate lots. And that's from the United States Supreme Court case of Lucas versus South Carolina Coastal Commission. The government's actions don't need to be an actual occupation or physical injury to the land to trigger compensation. Compensation has been ordered for such actions as impairment of the right of access to the land, or highway access to the land, or for noise from overflying aircraft. And I believe there's really no straight-faced argument that this legislation, which singles out wind and solar energy, yet ignores natural gas fracking or coal mining, how that somehow falls under the general police powers of townships to zone or regulate land use under their health, safety, and welfare powers. I believe this is simply a latest attempt to tip the scales in favor of fossil fuel generation and against renewable energy sources in our electric portfolio. Should this measure be enacted and somehow upheld by the courts, I think many unintended consequences would surely follow. Once embedded into Ohio law, the township referendum model will provide an easy legal pathway for challenging all manner of agricultural practices which do not meet the aesthetic or cultural whims of the township residents. Just as this legislation overrides the Ohio Power Siting Board for energy permitting, new legislation could override the Ohio Department of Agriculture's livestock licensing or siting powers. And while the risks to government authorities of passing this sort of legislation should be apparent, it's the measure's effects on people, real people and families in Ohio, that will be most profound. Local school districts in the affected townships will be deprived of millions of dollars in taxes and PILTs, investments which could make those rural schools competitive with their city cousins. And struggling rural economies will forego hundreds of construction jobs in the short term and the potential for hundreds more in the long term as green energy-related businesses expand nearby the project. Solar projects provide an extra revenue source for struggling farm families, and that is compatible with agricultural use. And the university specialists are coming up with more and more ways of integrating agricultural practices with solar. And for farmers approaching retirement, a government seizure of wind and solar development rights could mean the difference between a comfortable retirement and a forced sale of their land to outside developers. Also troubling is that Ohioans, and especially the younger Ohioans, who are making their choice and evaluating whether to stay in Ohio or seek opportunities in Columbus or the coasts, and these young Ohioans strongly support green energy, wind, and solar, and might see this measure as another attempt to impede those green energies here in the state. So if we want to keep the next generation of rural residents in their rural communities, we simply cannot continue to support fossil fuels at the expense of renewable energy. Well, thank you for your time, and please vote no on this legislation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions for our witness? Okay, we want to thank you for coming in.
Sure.
You kind of give us another angle to look at,
Yeah.
you know, with this, so we appreciate your testimony.
I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Okay, next is Roland Wolfram, Craig Kohler, and James Hofelt. Are they all here? They can kind of step up here and welcome.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the House Public Utilities. My name is Roland Wolfram, and I'm a resident of Defiance County, Ohio. Thank you for taking the time to hear my testimony on House Bill 118. When a solar company approached us about a solar farm, I listened because we are always trying to improve our profitability and be good stewards of the earth. One of my early concerns was, how was it going to affect our neighbors and friends? We insisted on some sort of a good neighbor policy, and they obliged. After watching the above video and learning more about the 300-foot setbacks and other features, I was very satisfied that this would be a good for our community. It would bring in around $500,000 for the school and hopefully relieve local property tax liabilities. With a solar project like this, the neighborhood would have less dust, noise, odor, pesticides, traffic, and less pollution than farming creates. We would benefit from cleaner air, cleaner waterways, year-round vegetation, increased pollinators, more wildlife, and biodiversity. As you know, farmers pay a lot of taxes to the schools in Ohio. Over the last 9 years, I have created a spreadsheet to calculate my property tax as a percentage of my income. 10% of my income goes to the local schools in the form of property tax. Rural schools have a difficult time passing a 1% tax levy, but yet farmers are paying a substantially higher amount. In the last 9 years, 16% of my total income went to property tax, plus 15% in FICA tax, and when you add in our federal and state tax, over 50% of our income goes to taxes. The $500,000 generated by the proposed solar project would help the local property owners substantially. I remember when I was 5 years old driving tractor with my dad. I was one proud 5-year-old. I knew at an early age what I wanted to be when I grew up. 3 days after graduation, I started a factory job because I knew it took a lot of money and hard work to become a farmer. My vacations from the factory job were spent working on the farm. I didn't mind that because growing up, we rarely had a vacation. My parents worked hard and taught me to do the same. My entire life, I've almost always had 2 jobs. I've seen a lot of changes to our small community over the years. The local grocery store, fresh produce market, convenience store, the hardware and auto dealership are all gone, and they're never coming back. Farming has changed also, with no-till, cover crops, GPS, auto track, and improved seed technology. One thing that hasn't changed is that it still takes a lot of hard work and long hours to run a farm. Many urban people moving to the country have unrealistic expectations of rural life. As with everything, change is inevitable. My father went from horses to small tractors, then to large tractors that steer themselves before he passed in 2009. I've transitioned from plowing to planting no-till with cover crops and irrigation, all in an effort to be more productive and a better steward. I consider myself a progressive conservative. In 2012, I bought a hybrid car. That first moment when the gasoline engine turned off and electric switched on, I felt very futuristic. Solar is the future. I'd like to be a part of that. I joke with my friends that I want to live to be 142 years old so I can see the year 2100. I know I probably won't make it, but that's not a goal you want to set too low. Imagine the change we'll see in the next 20 to 30 years. However, passing House Bill 118 sets a precedent for future referendums relative to property owners. If the main concern is that of not in my backyard, we must understand that the concern is self-serving, not for the greater good. Many opponents to solar are concerned with a view being altered. My corn in a good year will block more of their view than any solar panels will. When railroads and electricity came through the countryside, I'm sure someone complained, but they adapted for the greater good. I'm not telling anyone what to do with their property, but it seems hypocritical for them to tell me what I can do with my property. With all due respect, my land isn't their landscape or their backyard. Another concern of House Bill 118 is lack of representation. For example, my mother will be able to vote on this, but I live in the adjoining township and have no say regarding my own property. With this bill, I won't be able to vote, but a non-property owner will. A renter with multiple voters in the household will have more say than my mother or I do, and we have skin in the game. Compare this to a corporation with shareholders. Would a minority shareholders have controlling interest in significant management decisions? If this bill passes, what's next? Maybe I'll have to quit farming at night or not start till 8 a.m. Will I not be allowed to spread manure or spray pesticides because of the odor? Maybe I'll have to quit running my dryer fans at night. Will I have to stop harvest because the dust might interrupt their Saturday afternoon barbecue? Maybe I won't be able to drive my equipment down the road when they are going to work. Will I be able to limit who can hunt on my property? Maybe I won't be able to plant my crop because someone has allergies or it alters their view. Farming comes with a lot of risks: the weather, crop prices, global issues, input prices, increased taxes, and health risks from the elements. and stress from the unknown. Will we now have to deal with referendums telling us what we can and cannot do with our property? Where will it end? The Power Siting Board already calls for notices to affected property owners and local hearings. This bill adds layers of bureaucracy. This does not seem logical to me just after the Senate bill passed, Senate Bill 9, to cut burdensome red tape. Also in this bill, it appears that solar and wind is being singled out, but not fossil fuels or nuclear energy. So where do we want to invest our energy dollars? Bailing out a nuclear power plant benefits one community, but if you encourage and support solar energy, hundreds of communities will benefit. By supporting solar, by not passing HB118, you will also be sharing the wealth created from this opportunity with your communities that you serve. I know you want to do the right thing, but please do not pass this bill. Change is coming. We should not make it harder for clean energy. We should make it easier. We need to be building the power grid of the future instead of the grid of the past. The future grid is much more resilient and decentralized than a grid that relies on big power plants. By spreading out the energy generating capabilities, you will also spread the risk of one large location causing a failure. There is little to no industry in our rural communities, and we may not have another opportunity like this. The more roadblocks that businesses encounter, the greater the possibility that they will choose a friendlier state. I support keeping investments in Ohio. This bill is not only anti-property, it is also anti-business. In closing, I have worked many days straight through the night, over 24 hours with no sleep. Watching the sun come up is a great feeling of accomplishment. The wind and sun are part of our natural resources, and utilizing clean energy would be an equally rewarding sense of accomplishment. I should have a right to use my property how I deem best, and this bill takes that right away. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, Mr. Wolfram, thank you for being here today. Any questions for the, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Welcome. Now, which one?
Color.
Okay, James Cole.
Craig.
Craig?
Craig, right before James.
Craig Color, okay.
Okay. Chairman Hoops, Vice Chair Ray, Ranking Member Smith, and members of the Ohio House Public Utilities Committee. My name is Craig Color, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to testify in opposition to House Bill 118. I left home at 6:30 this morning, so I got here in time to testify. I think I probably could have slept in a little bit, but that's not your fault anyway. Raul and I, the previous guy, grew up as neighbors in the same township in Mark Center, Defiance County, and we share some of these same views, obviously, on this bill. As you know from previous committee hearings, this bill establishes a referendum process at the township level for all wind and solar projects.